Hey, welcome to Firescale Audiobooks. If you enjoy our audiobooks, please consider subscribing to the channel. Also, feel free to share your review in the comments section below.
Oi, Gary, get over here and check out yesterday's altered fight highlights. Tom shouted across the classroom. The lunch bell rang, echoing through the halls. Instead of pulling out a packed meal, Tom yanked a tablet from his desk drawer, propped it up, and loaded up PoTube, the #1 video platform. Within seconds, a crowd of curious classmates swarmed around his desk, eyes glued to the screen. If you're not here in 5 seconds, I'm hitting play without you, Tom warned. He glanced sideways. Gary wasn't paying attention. Under his desk, Gary's knees bounced nervously, hands fiddling with his phone. Tom frowned. From where he sat, it looked suspicious. Bro, are you seriously doing that in class? At least sneak off to the bathroom. Just a sec, Gary snapped, too focused to care. On his phone, a message blinked back at him. Be there this evening at 6. It was the 5th time he'd tried to type a reply, only to delete it each time. Nothing seemed right. Finally, frustrated, he sent a single letter, K. Who does this brat think he is? A man on the other end of the message slammed his fist on the table. By the time Gary shoved through the crowd, Tom had already started the video. On screen, 2 ripped fighters stepped into a cage, abs flexed, muscles shining under the lights. In the blue corner, undefeated with 13 wins, weighing 200 pounds, Kirk Summerfield, the announcer roared. The tall fighter, with a sharp goatee and spiked black hair, raised his fists. Facing him, with 10 straight wins, weighing 190, Sam Dill Pickle. The shorter bald man grinned with a creepy smile, soaking up the cheers. Hey, don't they look kind of like Tom and Gary? Someone from the crowd laughed. Holy crap, they really do. The classroom erupted in laughter, everyone except Tom and Gary. Gary, 16, hair dyed green over summer break, was known for pulling stunts like that. What he wasn't proud of was being completely hairless everywhere, except in one place. A fact his classmates unfortunately knew all too well thanks to one disastrous P-class incident that earned him a week's detention. Tom, on the other hand, was his opposite, quiet, introverted, with a buzz cut so short he might as well have been bald. He hated small talk so much he refused to go through cashier lines at supermarkets, preferring machines that didn't ask questions. Still, somehow, the odd pair had become inseparable. Back in the fight, the bell rang. Ladies and gentlemen, our altereds are going all out from the start, the announcer's voice boomed. Kirk's skin shifted yellow, black spots appearing across his arms, claws sprouting from his fingertips as fur spread across his face. His opponent's body changed too. Sam's cheeks bulged, his legs bent and webbed, his tongue whipping out like a toad's. Cheetah type altered versus frog type altered, the announcer shouted. This is going to be wild. The transformations took seconds. Sam lashed out first, his tongue wrapping around Kirk's forearm. Disgusting. Kirk snarled, muscles swelling as he flexed. With one brutal slash, he severed the slimy appendage. Yes, Gary pumped his fist. Come on, Kirk. Kirk blurred forward, faster than any human should move. Sam leapt high with frog-like legs, but Kirk caught him midair and smashed him to the mat. Moments later, the referee raised Kirk's hand. Winner, rookie champion, $10 million richer. The crowd in the classroom cheered almost as loud as the live audience. Altered fights were the biggest sport in the world, part spectacle, part proof of humanity's new evolution. Fossilized remains of ancient beasts have been infused into people, birthing altereds, hybrids of man and monster. Faster, stronger, more durable, even resistant to disease. Superhumans for a new age. But fossils were rare, the DNA priceless. Only the wealthy or those backed by powerful corporations could afford to become altered. The fighters they watched today weren't self-made. They were sponsored. Still, for kids like Tom and Gary, altereds were real-life superheroes. And while most kids dreamed of power for glory, Gary's eyes were locked on the giant check handed to the victor. $10 million. His pupils practically turned into dollar signs. For Gary, altereds weren't just heroes. They were the quickest ticket to wealth, fame, and everything he ever wanted. Little did he know that obsession would drag him down a path darker than he could ever imagine. A sharp whistle cut through the air, piercing the ears of every student on the school field. It was the signal for warm-up, 2 full laps around the track. Classes might have ended, but the day wasn't over. Physical training was mandatory. At the back, Gary squinted up at the giant clock on the school building. His vision blurred as the hands ticked in place. He hated his failing eyesight. To him, wearing glasses was nothing more than admitting weakness, admitting bad genes. Something the altered didn't have. He narrowed his eyes, pressing his hands to the sides of his face, a trick he'd learned to focus during class. 3:30. Still plenty of time. Move it, broccoli head, unless you want my size 12s planted in your backside. Coach Root bellowed. The man was massive, a trunk of a human being. With his bulk and height, Gary sometimes wondered if the teacher's DNA had been spliced with an ancient tree. Not eager to push his luck, Gary jogged forward, falling in a step beside Tom, who was already panting like he was about to keel over. "Why do they want to kill me?" Tom gasped between each labored breath. "You know it's easier to breathe if you don't talk and run at the same time," Gary pointed out calmly. He could have left Tom behind, but he never did. It was their routine. Tom slowed, giving up the pretense of keeping pace with the class. "Much better. Internet says jogging should be at a pace where you can still talk. You're pretty sure they didn't mean walking." Gary smirked as they mimicked running motions with their arms, barely moving forward. Their act didn't fool Coach Root. "Get over here, you vegetables." Once the class regrouped, Root dropped a rugby ball at his feet and called out Blake, the golden boy of their year. Tan skin, perfect curls, lean muscle. He was the kind of guy who looked ripped straight out of sports drama. The type both girls and coaches adored. Tom leaned in. "You know they say 10% of the boys match with 90% of the girls, right? Finder proves it. Not that I use it. I just swipe left on everyone so I can reject them first." Gary barely listened. His eyes were fixed on Blake, not out of jealousy for his looks or popularity, but because someone like Blake was the perfect candidate to be chosen as an altered. And if people like him existed, where did that leave someone like Gary? Root clapped his hands. "Listen up. Blake might be the best we've got, but there are plenty of Blakes out there. What this team lacks is defense. Tacklers. Today, your job is to stop him. Either strip the ball or take him down." One by one, students tried and failed. Then it was Gary's turn. The whistle blew. Blake charged forward, a human bulldozer. Gary's eyes locked in. He knew he'd never wrestle the ball free. His hands weren't strong enough. His only shot was a clean tackle. Unlike the others, Gary wasn't paralyzed by fear. Years of watching altered fights had sharpened his instincts. He saw patterns, tiny details in body language others missed. Blake always feinted off his right foot first. The ground was soft today. His steps sank deeper than usual. He'd spin right. Gary was sure of it. As Blake shifted, Gary adjusted. He anticipated the move perfectly. Dropping low, he lunged. Crack! Pain exploded across his face. Blake's knee smashed into his nose before Gary could finish the tackle. Blood gushed instantly, spilling down his chin. So what if I figured him out? Gary thought bitterly as he lay on the grass. I don't have the body to act on it. Blake dropped the ball, rushing to help him up. Damn, man, I'm sorry. Let me take you to the doctor. My family runs a clinic. I'll tell them not to charge you. Gary pressed tissues to his bleeding nose, voice low. It's fine. Wasn't your fault. It's mine for trying. Tom cracked up beside him. You should have seen your head whip back. And here I thought green hair meant you'd changed. Nope, still the same idiot. Normally, Gary would have laughed too. Today, he didn't. By the time the nurse confirmed his nose was broken, Gary barely listened. Surgery could fix it, but that wasn't what mattered. What mattered was the clock. 5:30. He bolted, not toward the hospital, not toward home, but toward something else entirely. His run carried him through littered streets and graffiti-marked apartments, past broken buzzers, and up 6 long flights of stairs to his family's cramped unit. Welcome back, sweetheart. Dinner'll be ready soon. Want me to leave yours out? His mother called from the kitchen. No, Mom. I'm heading out with Tom, he shouted, already rushing into his room. Amy, his younger sister, pulled off her headphones. Gary, what happened to your nose? Don't worry about it. And don't tell Mom. He changed quickly, slipping out before she could press him further. By 6, Gary was downtown, standing before a nightclub called Basement. He lied about meeting Tom. His real destination was here. I'll make our lives better, he swore silently as he pushed open the doors. Inside, men in suits waited. At the back, a man with a cigar sat flanked by bodyguards. Smoke curled from his lips as he smiled. I've been waiting for you, kid. Gary's secret was out, at least in this room. Over the summer, he hadn't just dyed his hair. He'd joined a gang. Over the summer holidays, it had been an eventful time for Gary. It was not just because he had chosen to dye his hair and get a new look, but because he had come to the decision to join a gang. Something that he had kept hidden from his friend, his mother, and even sister didn't know about. Had you been late, I was thinking of chopping one of your toes off, so you didn't forget, the man sitting down told him. It was only 5:30, so the nightclub had a few hours before it would officially open. However, the club itself was actually just a front, run and used by the gang known as the Underdogs. The smoking man, who was talking to Gary, was the leader of the Underdogs, Damien Hawk. The gang members mostly wore suits, making them look like the average businessman or someone who worked for the Secret Service. This included their leader, although even a student could tell he wasn't a businessman. He had this crazy look about him, which was just too wild for someone who was supposed to sit inside a cubicle all day. He had a black mohawk for his hair and a round earring on his right ear. Yet the most prominent feature about the man were his eyes. They were the eyes of a madman. Usually, Gary was fearless for someone his age. If he wasn't, he would have never gathered the courage to join a gang in the first place. But these people scared him. Gary gulped a little, not saying a word. The palms of his hands were starting to sweat a little. Hey, I'm just kidding, Damien laughed. Why don't you head to the back while the grown-ups do a bit of talking? I'll get someone to fetch you when we need you. While walking, Gary was shaking a little. It was hard to tell whether Damien had actually been joking about this sort of punishment. There had been times when he had been forced to witness the leader actually cut off one of his own men's limbs. Before joining this gang, Gary had decided to do some research into gangs. Unfortunately, he had only ended up reading a few comics and manga books here and there, and to be honest, this had led him to the conclusion that it wouldn't be too much trouble. Even the odd internet searches and movies had romanticized gangs. Alas, being in a real gang had turned out to be nothing like in those comics and manga books. The members of Underdogs did anything to make a profit. They didn't shy away from selling drugs, killing, stealing, or extorting others. There were many times when Gary had wished to just leave, but there were two things keeping him there. One of them was the fear of leaving the place. Would they even let him? After everything he had seen and heard? It was a question he didn't dare to ask out loud. Come on, Gary, you can do this. Just think of the money, man, come on. And that was the second reason. Pushing the door open, Gary entered the back of the nightclub where there was a large staff room. Inside were other teens that were not too far apart in age to him, sitting on a sofa. He sat down beside them, but not a single one of them spoke a word. Gary had seen them a few times before, but from what he could tell, none of them went to his school. While looking at them, he wondered what their reasons could be for being here. Not why they were there today, he knew that, but why they had decided to join a gang. Most people his age only joined out of necessity. The world was a tough place to live in at the moment. The economy had been greatly affected ever since the introduction of autonomous machinery. It had created new jobs, but at the same time gotten rid of many old jobs. Gary's own family had suffered the aftermath. His old mother had lost her job as a factory worker sorting out parts, but she wasn't the only one. Mass unemployment had ruined many families. The government solution to all of this had been to offer retraining in the new skills and departments that the world now required, such as cybersecurity, programming, engineering, mechanics, and so on. But it had proven to be too hard for her to go through any type of training with the little time she had. Ever since, she had been stuck doing odd jobs. All of this had created a tiering system within the towns and cities, making the divide between the rich and poor even more evident. Tier 5 being the lowest, while Tier 1 would be the highest. These tiers were based on how high their GDP per month was. The quality of life, the technology, the medical care, all of these things were better the more cash a town or city generated. However, There was one sector that had started to boom because of this, and that was organized crime. It was highly profitable for them, as they catered and fed on the truly desperate who were clinging onto anything that lived in the tier 5s, while also serving the very top in the higher tiers. Gangs would exist in all of the tiered cities, and would often work together as the middlemen. The underdogs were one such group. They weren't a huge gang, due to Gary coming from a small town in the first place, but they were widely known and feared in the town. He was aware of the bad things they had committed, but he had chosen to ignore it. Their town was a tier 3, so the quality of life was okay, but they had to make sacrifices to stay here, forced to live in a small rundown place with little room. Still, they were barely hanging on, and both children knew that despite their mother's best attempts at hiding it from them, Gary had seen the bills that would come in the mail. If this carried on, then it would just be a matter of time until they would have to move to a lower-tier city. The education would be worse and crime rates would be higher. He wasn't going to let this happen. Their life had already turned to crap as it was, and he didn't want it to deteriorate. No, he wanted a better future for his mother and his little sister, even if he had to pay the price for it. He was the older sibling, the only man of the house, and he wished to return the favor to his mother, who had been looking after them even when times had been tough. He did not wish to run like that man. While waiting in the staff room, the double doors suddenly opened again. When Gary saw who it was, his eyes started to light up with excitement. "Hey, kiddo, you're here again." The man greeted him with a smirk on his face. "Kirk, I just saw your fight this morning." "Congratulations," Gary said, jumping up from the sofa. The man who had entered the room was the same one from the video that he had been watching earlier today with Tom and her classmates. The winner of the altered fight. Most altered worked for some type of organization, and Kirk was no different. He worked for the underdogs as well. They were his sponsor, or at least they owned the corporation, which Kirk was part of. Gary didn't know much of the details of how the relationships between them came to be. Still, he couldn't imagine how much money the underdogs must have put into Kirk for him to become the altered semi-superstar he was today. When the frogman jumped up like that, and you used your raw power to smash him to the ground, it all seemed too easy for you. Gary continued to speak excitedly. It might have looked easy, but most of the things I did today, I only managed because I was an altered. Don't go around trying to do things like that yourself. Otherwise, you would just end up hurting yourself. Kirk cautioned his overeager fanboy. "I know," Gary replied, a little depressed as he thought about how different his life would be if he could be an altered himself. Seeing the strange look on his face and noticing something else about Gary, a light bulb lit up above Kirk's head. "I know. You should have some time before you have to do your thing, right? Come with me," Kirk ordered. "And don't worry. If Damien calls for you, I'll say you were with me." Gary didn't know what was going on, but trusted Kirk and decided to follow him. Ever since he had joined the gang, everyone had seemed a bit scary to him, rough around the edges, all but Kirk. With the altered, everything just seemed to click. The good thing was, Kirk was also treated as quite the valuable asset to the group, so he could get away with things the others couldn't. If Kirk said he wouldn't get in trouble, then he should be safe. The two of them left the staff room and went over to one of the empty club rooms. It was quite a large club with 3 different rooms that would often play 3 different music types. Right now, they were in what was known as the cheese room. It would usually play one's favorite hits from the time Gary's mother would have been his age. Still, during the day, it looked completely different. The lights were on, so there were no fancy colored lights, and the disco ball above looked less than special. "What are we doing here?" Gary asked. "You're not going to ask me to dance with you, or something like that, are you?" Kirk started to laugh. Gary seemed to have a talent for making him laugh. "No, you idiot. I'm going to teach you how to fight." "How to fight? Why would I need to learn that?" Kirk pointed to his own nose, and that's when Gary realized. His nose was still broken from the rugby practice. Wait, I think he has the wrong idea. Does he think I'm getting bullied or something? No, wait, this is Dash. You don't have to explain yourself. I'm sure the other guy looks even worse. Anyway, it will be good to just show you a few basic things. With the line of work you're doing, who knows when it will come in handy. Kirk interrupted him. Gary didn't say anything else. He decided it would be stupid if he did try to clear up this misunderstanding. Besides, since one of his idols had offered to give him a personal lesson, he would be silly to try to get out of it. It started off with Kirk showing him the first basic punch, a jab in boxing. Punching the air, he demonstrated it a few times. A few major points that Gary took from this was that Kirk's right hand was always covering the side of his face, even when throwing out the punch. The left foot would twist slightly while throwing the punch outward. At the same time, his hip would move in as well. Rather than a push, the punch was more of a snap. It was now Gary's turn to try these things, and he repeated all the steps in his head. He punched a few times, and it looked good and felt right. It looks like I have a talent for this. Maybe I should join a boxing club instead. What do you think? Gary asked, but turning his head, he could see the look of disappointment on Kirk's face. Sorry, Kirk said, rubbing the back of his head. Your punch is good, the movements are perfect, and you did everything right. Gary had a feeling a huge but was coming. But your punch is so slow. Is that as fast and hard as you can go? Kirk asked. Gary would have loved to tell him it wasn't, but unfortunately that would be a lie. He had been trying his hardest without holding back. Things always seemed to end up this way for him. He understood the theory, understood how things worked, yet for some reason it was impossible to perform the way he pictured it in his head. The doors to the cheese room opened and interrupted their training session. One of the men in suits walked in. There you are. The boss has been looking for you. When Gary returned to the first club room, he saw Daimon still sitting down on the sofa. Opposite him were 5 kids, including Gary, all standing up straight and waiting for orders. Out on the table were 5 metal briefcases locked with a unique combination. Time for you guys to get to work, Damien said. This was Gary's job in the organization. He worked as a transporter, and tonight his job would be to deliver whatever was in these suitcases. While Damien was busily explaining the job details, something had caught Gary's eyes. It was just for a brief moment, so he was unsure if his eyes might have played a trick on him, but he felt he had seen something very odd. Did that briefcase just move? The explanation from Damien continued about today's special task. There were 5 briefcases in front of them, and there were 5 of them. Each person was to deliver the suitcase in front of them to the correct location safely, and naturally they had all been given different locations. Damien continued to mention some other details, but Gary was not paying too much attention to that, still focused on the briefcase in front of him, waiting for it to move again. Gary was smart enough to figure out the reason for there being 5 of them. A few of them had to be dummies, mixed in to confuse whoever might plan to steal them. If his intuition was right, the one in front of him was the real one. That and the fact that he could have sworn he saw it move, although ever since he had started staring at it, it had behaved like a normal suitcase. Am I imagining things? Gary started to doubt himself. He looked at one of the men in a suit who was closest to the case. The 2 of them made eye contact for a brief second before Gary looked away. If he kept up eye contact for any longer, he was worried he was going to get hit. All right, are there any questions? Damien asked. One of the students standing there raised his hand. He was a tall, weak-looking boy with curly hair. He hadn't been in the organization for long, and Gary had only seen him a couple of times. What's in the package? The boy asked. Immediately, Gary clenched his fist and looked down at the floor as he knew what was coming next. Just as expected, a few seconds later he heard a whack and could see the student tumble from the corner of his eye. The man looked like he was about to hit him again, but Damien interrupted him. Stop. The boy is still new, so I'll forgive him. Damien then looked at the others before stopping at Gary. Greenie, tell him the rules of being a transporter. Yes, boss, Gary answered, turning his body, looking down the line of people. Never take the package, never ask what's in the package, and never look inside the package. Excellent, Damien replied with a slow clap. Break one of these rules, and let's just say you don't want to break these rules. I can proudly tell you that we never had anyone break the rules twice. Make of that what you will. Clicking his fingers, one of the suited men handed each of them a small wad of cash tied up with an elastic band. It wasn't thick like in the movies, but judging by the size and weight, this job was the highest-paying job Gary had ever been on. Each of them had been given $500, which was just half of the payment up front. Upon completing the job, they would get the other half when they returned. Seeing the amount of money in his hand, Gary gulped. $1,000 was a lot of money to him. especially for someone who was 16, and best of all, it would go a long way to help out his family. He was already doing calculations in his head. They could pay the electric and gas bill, and with what would be left, he could buy a new phone for his sister. This money was nothing for the gangsters, and simply put, they were taking advantage of the students. Both sides were aware of that, but the students didn't have another choice. Where would they get a job at their age? Not mention such a high-paying one. All the supermarket and fast food jobs had been replaced by computer screens and machinery. The construction sites were already full of manual laborers. Only technology whiz kids might get a job helping another corporation be the next new thing, and Gary wasn't one of these people. That type of stuff was more suited to his friend Tom. Each of them was given a location, and the job had officially started. Picking up the metal suitcase, it had some weight to it, but it was hard for him to tell if there was anything inside or if that was just the case's weight. Jiggling it, he was trying to guess what it was, and once again another man was giving him a stare. Right, don't ask what's in the case. They left the nightclub, and then each of them went their separate ways, including the tall, curly-haired boy who now had a bloody nose. "Stay safe, guys," Gary said quietly, more to himself than the others, as each of them went off. During all of this, there was one big worry at the back of Gary's mind. This was the highest-paying job they had ever received. The gangsters wouldn't just hand out money willy-nilly, so this also meant it was the most dangerous job that he had ever been given as well. There had been no problems so far on all of his runs. It was the reason why the underdogs were using students in the first place. They didn't look suspicious, and their faces were unknown. There was less of a chance for the students to rat them out to another gang, and they would be too scared to do something like that anyway. Still, with every job there was this risk, and it didn't get easier. On the contrary, with each successful mission, it felt that at some point his luck would run out. It was safe to say that Gary stood out a bit. He was running around with a fancy metal briefcase that looked too fancy for the clothes he was wearing. Usually, he would do his drop-offs on foot, so he was still in his trainers and his favorite black and red tracksuit. He didn't care about the gawking eyes that were looking at him, and he just hurried on to the location. When he had eventually reached the location, it turned out to be a construction site. The workers had already left and gone home for the day. The initial foundation for an apartment block had already been built, but there were no walls or roof yet. For his job, Gary was to give the briefcase to a person that was meant to meet him there. He waited in the apartment building center, where there was nothing but the ground and a few cement bags here and there. Gary was nervously tapping his foot and continued to look all over the place. When he pulled out his phone, it was now 8:05 p.m., already past the meeting time. "Hello," Gary shouted. "I'm here." His voice echoed slightly, but there was no reply. "Am I in the wrong place?" he thought to himself. After double-checking he was in the right place, he sent a text to Damien. "No one here, what should I do?" It was the first time something like this had happened. Tired of waiting, Gary started to walk around, checking if he could spot the person. Then, while walking around, he saw it. He discovered a dark red liquid on the floor, coming from behind one of the building's support pillars. "Please tell me that's just paint," Gary silently prayed. This wasn't some movie, and Gary wasn't dumb enough to go around that pillar when he was already sure there would be a dead person behind it. Then his phone went off. He pulled the phone out of his pocket, and there were only 2 words. "Run back." Lifting his head, he could see a 4-inch blade coming right towards him. Out of instinct, the only thing he could do was lift the metal suitcase up, and thankfully a clanging sound was heard as the suitcase clashed with the knife, protecting his face. He only saw the man who had thrown the knife for a brief second, because before he knew it, Gary was running for his life. He didn't know where he was running. He just knew he had to get away from that psycho. He could feel his heart beating so loudly that he thought it would jump out of his chest. He also noticed that his underwear was feeling uncomfortably warm as he had let the fluids held up in him go. "I'm going to die, I'm going to die." That was a real gangster, and he just tried to stab me. Running towards where he came from, he saw a few more men at the gate that were wearing suits. As soon as they saw him, they charged at him as well. "There's more. What the hell do I do?" Dashing to the side, he left the apartment block and was now heading to the more gritty area of the construction site, where there were several mounds of dirt, diggers, and more. The problem was there were only 2 entrances to the construction site, the one that he had entered from and the other on the opposite end. One was stationed in the north, the other south, yet in his panic he had run west. There was a wall surrounding the area, and on the top there was barbed wire. Even if he didn't care about hurting himself, scaling something like that would have been impossible. Eventually, the adrenaline in Gary's body had lessened, and he was feeling incredibly weak after the rush. His hands and legs were shaking, and he knew he couldn't run away for much longer. Diving in between objects, he eventually decided to hide behind a dirt mound to catch his breath. Gary could use several objects and things to hide in between in his attempt to avoid the men chasing after him. Peeking around the hill of dirt he had hidden behind, he could see 3 of them in total, all with a blade in their hand. At this point, Gary was wondering if he should call the police, but if he did, then it would just be his own gang after his life. Suddenly, the suitcase started to move about again, flinging Gary's hand slightly. It definitely felt like there was something alive inside. What the hell is in there? But that wasn't important right now. Observing, he peeked around the corner again, planning to make his next move. He could see one person on his far left and the other on his far right, searching between all the items for him. Wait, where's the third person? A sharp shooting pain spread in Gary's lower back. It was suddenly throbbing and felt warm. Gritting his teeth, Gary slung the suitcase while turning around. The corner managed to smash the top of his assaulter's head, causing Gary to let go of the suitcase, which fell to the ground. The man appeared hurt and dizzy momentarily, but he wasn't knocked out. More notably, Gary could see that his hands had blood on them. Touching his back, he felt the blood there as well. He had been stabbed. "Damn it, I'm just a kid in high school," Gary blurted out. The man looked stunned by the words for a second, as it looked like Gary's weaving body was about to fall over. From the shock and the tension of everything that was happening, he fell towards the man. At that moment, he started to think about his sister's smile and his mother's crying face if he was to leave them now. Before hitting the ground, he fought through the pain and placed his left foot out, stabilizing himself. He twisted his hip and back foot, and with his right hand, he threw out the strongest push he could, hitting the man right on the chin. It wasn't a jab, but another punch that he had seen Kirk do. Learning the principles of the jab had set him up for this perfect punch. A right straight. On contact, he felt it connect cleanly, and he felt a surge through his arm. The man fell to the floor and was knocked out, while at the same time, Gary fell down as well. Despite his accomplishment, he felt tired, weak, and just wanted to close his eyes. The only thing he could see in front of him was the suitcase. It was moving more than ever, so much so that the suitcase looked to be jumping up and down. "I don't want to die," Gary whispered, barely enough energy to speak. Click. He heard the sound of the suitcase opening up. The next moment, his vision had gone black. His senses were still slightly there, and he felt an even more immense pain now digging into his wrist. It was far worse than the stab, but he was too tired to even react or shout out. Then, even with his eyes closed and his vision gone, something appeared in front of him. Gary's eyes started to flutter open slowly as he was regaining consciousness. The first thing he saw were some very tall trees above him. The sky was gray, making it hard to tell if it was just about to turn to night or whether it would soon be day again. As he lifted up his body, he noticed the sound of ruffling, which turned out to come from the many leaves underneath him. "Am I in the woods?" Gary thought. He looked around and could see nothing but trees, yet no sign of a pathway or road. "Why did I come here? Wasn't I just Dash?" Arg! His head started to ring with pain. When lifting it up, he could see that the sleeves of his clothing were partially torn. Thinking back, he tried to remember the last thing that had happened, but all that came to mind was the throbbing pain in his backside. "That guy, he stabbed me." Lifting up his shirt, he peeked over his shoulder. Gary tried to take a look, but he found nothing, not even after running his fingers over the supposed wound. For a second, he questioned himself. Could it be that all of it was just a bad dream? Alas, he quickly noticed something that made him think all of it had been real. Running down his trousers, there were signs of dried blood, looking to have dripped from his own wound. Something had definitely happened earlier. He should have been in pain. There should have been a wound, yet there was nothing. In fact, his body felt far better than it had ever done before. Just what the hell happened after I got stabbed? How the hell did I get here? Shit, Where the hell is here in the first place? He had no memories whatsoever of what had happened from the construction site to where he was now, and in all his thinking, he had completely ignored something obvious that was right in front of him this whole time. His vision had slightly been altered, and in more ways than one. Even though it was quite dark out, he could see details in the night he shouldn't have been able to with his vision. The groves on the trees a distance away, the ants crawling up on the trees, passing food to each other, and then there was the moon. It was still out and would suggest that it was still the middle of the night after all. Hang on, are those ants? Eventually Gary noticed the discrepancy with his eyes. How is that possible? Could it be because of all those carrots Mom has been cooking lately? They say it improves your eyesight. Or is that just another internet myth? I bet Tom would know. In the middle of his crazy thoughts, he registered something in the top left corner of his vision. When looking at it, it reminded him of a notification from an email or a game. He moved his head trying to get rid of it, but wherever he would look, it would stay there. Then he started to touch his face to see if he was wearing anything, but there was nothing. The notification appeared to be glued onto his vision. How the hell do I get rid of this thing? When thinking about the notification itself, it suddenly opened and a screen appeared in front of him, hovering in midair. Your bloodlust has been lowered. You're no longer enraged. State has been updated to normal. Is that a system? Gary had played a few games in the past with a similar interface before. However, he wasn't quite the gamer himself. He never had time for them, as he was always busy trying to come up with ways to make money. The one who this would have been perfect for would be his buddy Tom. But with his limited knowledge, Gary still knew how to navigate it a bit. The notifications looked like they could be deleted, and it looked like there were more options on his general interface. The annoying thing was it was all blocking his field of vision still. At the same time, he couldn't deny it was kind of cool. Like he had been turned into some futuristic robot. Nevertheless, he didn't like what he was reading. The word bloodlust did not sound good at all. What exactly had happened? Had he been turned into some type of vampire and was now required to feed on blood? It would at least explain the wounds healing on his body so far. He had read supernatural stories of things like that before. Quickly touching his teeth, he felt nothing, and they appeared to be the same as they had always been. Then there was the second half of the message. It had been lowered. Reading this, he gulped down and tried to look at himself. There wasn't a huge amount of blood on him apart from that on his trousers. Being able to escape from that construction site alive, while 3 men were chasing him, he started to consider the worst-case scenario. No, nothing happened. Stop being paranoid. Gary tried to convince himself. Surely, I would have remembered something like that. But would I really? I still have no clue how I got in the woods in the first place. Unfortunately, with his tendency to forget even menial tasks like emptying the washing machine when his mother asks him to, he was unable to rely on his good memory. After deleting those notifications, Gary decided to study the system a little. The first thing he could see was an image of himself looking back at him and his name by the side with a few stats. Name, Gary Dem. Level 1. EXP 0/100. Health, 100 out of 100. Energy, 100/100. Heart rate, 42 BPM. State, normal. Looking at the information in front of him, he was trying to figure out what they meant. Gary appeared unable to open some sort of description for them, and there wasn't really anyone or anything that told him what was going on. Health seemed to be pretty self-explanatory, but energy, the best he could come up with was that it might be something similar to stamina. As for the heart rate, he considered it to be a very strange thing to appear in the first place. What worried him was that his resting heart rate had never been that low. This was the heart rate that athletes were able to achieve, and although Gary wasn't unfit, he was far from being an athlete. As for state, he could only relate it to the message he had gotten previously about his bloodlust decreasing, something he chose to ignore for now. What interested him more than anything was the level by his name. It reminded him of the RPG games that had been introduced to him. He didn't know why, but his favorite part in those games had never been the completion of quests nor the exploration of the world, but simply its grinding. He would spend hours just killing creatures watching that bar increase. Tom would always complain about his playstyle, stating that it wasn't the fastest way to level up. After all, he was defined as a noob in Tom's eyes. On the screen itself, at the top, the tab read Status, but right next to that, there was another little tab labeled Quests. It had a little red dot, which would usually indicate that there was something new that he hadn't seen before. At least that would be the case if it worked like his phone notifications. Cloaking on that, a few more screens popped up in front of him again. New quest received. Get the perfect body. You can now do amazing things you never could have done before, but you're limited by your former weaker self. You need to get into top shape to display your full potential. Do you even lift? No? Then start lifting. Diet is crucial to this task. You will soon see improvements beyond your wildest dreams. The most important thing is to stay consistent. Daily tasks, Tuesday. Push day. Get to the gym and start pushing. Instructions will appear once you get there. Diet. Eat 2 kilograms of meat per day. Get that sweet protein. Quest reward. That sweet EXP you need and love. 2 kilograms of meat. Is the system crazy? What does it think I am, some tiger or something? How is it even possible to eat that much? Apart from that, the system messages seemed enthusiastic, to say the least. Whoever had designed it must be by a very strange person. Scrolling up there seemed to be one more quest that he had received before that one. New quest received. Your first turning. 14 days until the next full moon. Survive. Reading this carefully, his thoughts reached a certain conclusion. There was only one supernatural creature in books and movies that he could think of that had any relation to the full moon. Heading back to the notifications, he scrolled up and checked the very first one he had received. Because it wasn't a new one he had missed before, but now he remembered seeing something before blackout. He read the words multiple times, the first system message that had ever appeared. I'm not a vampire. Well, it seems like I won't have a problem with body hair anytime soon. Gary had seen the concept of the mythological creature being used in books and movies, but he had never really been the type to pay too close attention to these things. Thinking back to the few films he had watched with such being, a certain thought came to his mind. Am I now an altered? It sounded a bit strange, because from what Gary knew, becoming an altered should be a long and difficult process. However, perhaps the thing inside the suitcase might have been a new product from some company that had discovered a way to speed up the process. Looking around him, the suitcase itself was long gone, probably left behind at the construction site. Maybe it's just called a werewolf, because it has made me into an altered based on a wolf-type beast? Who knows, maybe all altered have such a system, and have just kept it a secret, or maybe it's something new that was in the suitcase. Either way, if I am an altered, then my body should have changed. Gary knew for a fact that his vision had suddenly improved, so why not other things? When a human became an altered, one of the big changes he would undergo would be getting superhuman strength. To test his theory, he walked up to one of the trees, looked at it for a few seconds, and then started to shake his whole arm. Gary was confident. All the signs were telling him he had become an altered. With no doubt in his mind, he threw out his fist and hit the tree with great force. For a few seconds, there was nothing, and then an almighty scream traveled throughout the forest. The tree was completely fine, but the same could not be said about Gary's knuckles. Looking at them, he could see they were grazed and slightly bleeding. The skin was starting to peel off. It was apparent he hadn't held back at all when throwing the punch. You've been injured. 2 HP. 98/100 HP. Minus 2 HP for that. I'm not sure if I should complain about this being a lot or be happy about it, not doing more damage to me. Also, what happens when I hit 0 HP? Will I just instantly die? Well, I suppose hitting it 49 more times at full strength would eventually break my fists and lead to severe blood loss. Maybe. It was clear that the system itself was quite complicated. Your heart rate has increased. 50 BPM. It seemed kind of useless to Gary that the system showed off his heart rate. He didn't see any need in it, as it didn't seem to affect anything else. After the pain had subsided, Gary wanted to run a few more tests. He planned to check if he was now faster or could transform parts of his body. Unfortunately, being in the middle of a forest, he lacked any equipment to measure his speed, and just running felt the same as always. Gary also had no idea how to change parts of his body. He tried concentrating on his arm, wishing for it to turn into something else, but nothing happened. It didn't make any difference when he tried to do the same with his legs, nose, ears, eyes, or any other parts. Eventually, he sighed and gave up for the time being. He was interested in the quests, but it was already starting to get late, so he couldn't go to the gym at this time to see if there would be any improvements. The food quest was theoretically the easiest to complete, but given his family situation, it would be a tough one. Meat was expensive, and eating 2 kilograms a day would be near impossible. There was half the payment up front, but if he could, he would have still liked to help his mother with that. Finally, there was the other quest that would arrive in 14 days. He had an idea of what would happen on this day, but he couldn't believe it. So far, there had been no signs of his body drastically being altered other than what the system was telling him. At least he had 14 days to figure out what to do about it. It was dark out, and if he stayed out any later, his mother would probably be worrying about him. So he decided to exit the woods. It didn't take long, as he could clearly see a pathway with his improved vision, and when he was out of the woods, he knew exactly where he would be. From there, he started to jog. He had become quite the good runner, working as a transporter and being cheap with his money. The journey from where he was would take around 20 minutes. Finally, he had arrived back home and could hear the sound of his sister singing from outside the door. When he went to open it, he noticed something. His breath. I just ran for 20 minutes, and I'm not even tired. Maybe I am an altered after all. This thought excited Gary more than anything. Checking his heart rate, it had also lowered down to 45 BPM. Entering inside, he immediately started to take off his clothes. They had been torn ragged, and some of them had signs of blood on them. He headed into their room, and his sister was a little surprised that her brother had just started to strip in front of her. She immediately closed her eyes and turned around. "What the hell? Gary, hurry up and put some clothes on," Amy shouted. He quickly stuffed his clothes into a school sports bag and placed that in the bottom corner, before throwing the rest of his belongings on his bed and finally changing into something new. "Oh, you're back, Gary. The food is ready for you whenever you need it. Just warm it up in the microwave," his mother shouted. "Thanks, but I'm not hungry," Gary replied. "Feel free to have seconds if you want." "That's strange. You usually come back starving. Did you eat at Tom's?" she asked with some motherly worry. "Yeah," Gary shouted back. It certainly was strange. Every time when he came back from his work, Gary would be hungry, and he hadn't eaten before leaving. The last meal he had was from lunch, but he didn't feel hungry at all. Going through multiple drawers, Gary was looking for something. Without noticing it, he eventually searched through Amy's side of the room. "What the? A diary?" he murmured to himself, picking it up. "Hey, stay away from my things." She snatched the diary and immediately went over to his side of the room. "Just tell me what you're looking for." "Bandages, plasters, or something for my Han Dash." When looking at his hand, he noticed that it had completely healed. "When did that happen?" 100 HP. 99 out of 100 energy. Eat more meat to restore your energy. When idle, energy points will be used to restore HP. It looked like super healing could be added to the list of abilities he might possess. "Did you go to the doctor?" "Your nose looks better," Amy pointed out, noticing it wasn't crooked anymore. "Yeah," Gary replied, which seemed to be his go-to response today. It was hard for him to process everything that was going on around him. Ding, ding, ding. Multiple notifications, sounds were coming in one after the other. When Amy turned around, she noticed that they were coming from her brother's phone. Since she was closer to it, at the moment she passed it to him, but not before sneaking a peek at what the messages were. "Bastard, I'll kill you," was the preview message. The rest of it was cut off. "Gary, are you in trouble?" she asked while handing over the phone. He snatched away his phone and left the room in a hurry. "It's nothing. Must be Tom playing a prank on me. Don't worry about it." Before his sister could ask any questions, he already locked himself on the toilet. Sitting down, he started to read the messages coming through one by one, and his hands couldn't stop shaking. "Where are you? Answer now. The item is missing. You know the rules. You have until the end of today to return back with the item. If you're not here, you can say goodbye to your family." "Oh, shit." Gary was unsure what exactly had happened to the item, but he could come up with a few guesses. The item was currently with him, or more accurately speaking, it had combined with him. After a person became an altered, it was impossible to reverse the process. If he returned to the gang and tried to explain to them what had happened, he would be killed for sure. That or they would enslave him and make him work as an altered, although he first would have to prove to be one, which ironically he was unable to. Alternatively, the real item might still be in the suitcase, but if so, it must have long since been taken by the other group after his stabbing. However, it would mean that his current situation would be unrelated, which seemed more than unlikely. Either way, at the end of the day, he had failed his job, and that meant that his end wouldn't be a pretty one. It was the first time this had ever happened to Gary, yet he had seen what had happened to others in the gang who had failed the underdogs. Going back, there would just be suicide. It's a good thing I gave them a fake address. They don't know where my real home is, but what do I do if they find out? What will happen to Amy and Mom? It was early morning, and the sun had barely risen, causing a dull gray sky. That day, at a construction site, when the workers were about to start work, they came across 3 gruesome bodies. In fact, it was hard for them to call them bodies. Each one appeared to have been mauled beyond recognition. Each had large pieces of flesh torn off and huge scratches across their faces and bodies. Blood was all over the construction site. The first thing they did was call the police, who had promptly closed off the site as a crime scene. "What do you think, boss?" a young policeman asked his superior, whose most prominent features were his brown overcoat and his scruffy beard. Anton Milston was this small town's chief of police. They were used to little cuffs happening here or there, but nothing on this sort of scale. Kneeling down, he started to look at the blood. "Did you take a DNA sample of all the blood you could find?" Anton questioned. "Yep, they're already testing it and should come up with a few things soon. Hopefully we already have them on file. If my guess is right, it looks like we have a little gang war going on. Someone transporting certain goods, a trade gone wrong, and an empty briefcase. In that case, chances are good we already have their prints in the system." And yet there was one thing Anton had no answer for yet. Why had the transporter left behind the briefcase? "You mean these 3 corpses were the attackers, boss?" Transporters usually travel alone, since it's easier to blend in that way. From what we know, the gangs mostly use teenagers and young adults, none of whom would dress as flashy as the victims. Still, this makes it even more bizarre that a transporter could kill 3 armed thugs. Unless, of course, the one transporting goods was something they didn't expect. An altered, a female voice concluded. Turning around, the 2 of them saw a middle-aged woman and man walk underneath the yellow tape. Neither one was dressed like police. They were in uniform, although it looked a little bit fancy for one to be wearing it out in the open. The uniforms were gray in color, with gold around the edges where the trim would be. It was tight-fitting while still allowing for free movement, expandable, and most importantly breathable. What stood out most, though, was the crest on their left chests. A silver rose with a sword going down the middle, clearly showing who they were and where they had come from. "Damn it, what are you guys doing here? It's too early to say for sure that this is an altered case." Anton stood up to complain. The handsome middle-aged man with a strange uniform, whose name tag read Frank Hugh, had short black hair and a serious look to him. When Anton looked at him, he felt a slight shiver go down his spine because he felt nothing. There were no emotions emanating from this man. Despite the gruesome state of the victims, he didn't even blink an eye. At least with his female partner, Sadie Nimper, she displayed an arrogant air of importance. Unfortunately, she seemed to not be shy about it either. "Look, Mr. Milston, even a toddler could tell you at first glance that this crime scene could only have been accomplished by an altered," she berated the local chief of police. "The 2 of us will take over this investigation from now on. I expect you to support us, as is your duty." Without waiting for a reply, Sadie was off to talk to the others about the evidence that had been found so far. "Sir, are they really members of that White Rose?" The young policeman whispered to not attract the attention of the scary-looking female. "Yes, and unfortunately that means they're in charge," Anton replied, clenching his fist and walking away. He had never liked their attitude and how they behaved as if they were above the police force. Anton wasn't upset because they outranked him. No, it was because they genuinely behaved as if they were superior beings. "He my advice, boy, never fight with them. I'm sure you know this already, but both of them are altered." With the introduction of altered, it was unfortunately a sad reality that certain people would try to use these special abilities and powers for no good. As the police's simple guns wouldn't do much when faced with an altered, the government decided to combat fire with fire. The Altered Investigation Force was established, more commonly known as White Rose. The next day, the sound of the alarm woke Gary up. Instinctively, he hit the big snooze button above it to turn it off. He felt horrible, and his head was pounding with a strange pain. Seems like I feel asleep after all, Gary thought. He had hardly gotten a wink of sleep. Less because of all that had happened to him ever since yesterday's cursed transporter job, and more because he had been too scared imagining what Daimon would do to him, or to his family. I have to make sure they never find out about this place, Gary reminded himself, when his thoughts were suddenly interrupted by a strange scent entering his nose. Like a dog, he started to unconsciously sniff about in the air and followed the origin of the scent. That's when he noticed his bully rumbling. He was extremely hungry after last night. Eventually, he arrived in front of the fridge. Opening it, he found a fresh, uncooked steak sitting in a small pile of blood. Before he knew it, his hand had already reached out and grabbed the piece of meat. He lifted the whole thing up, about to place it in his mouth. "You!" Amy shouted. "What are you doing? That's still raw." Hearing the voice of his younger sister, Gary snapped out of it, realizing he had been about to eat a raw piece of uncooked meat. Caught in the act, he quickly placed it back in the fridge. "Now we'll have to eat steak tonight, with all your germs over it. Did you even wash our hands before? Look, they're covered in blood." Amy continued to complain. "Mom was saving that to treat us tonight. You should know how rare it is that we get to eat something so nice." To make matters worse, his mother entered the room, drawn in by the commotion. "What are you two arguing about so early in the morning?" she asked with bags under her eyes. "This doofus just tried to eat raw steak," Amy shouted, pointing at him. Gary's hands were shaking. Everything was kind of getting to him, and now he couldn't even control his body. "I'm sorry," Gary apologized as he ran past the two of them and headed to the bathroom. "I'll buy a new one, I promise." When he entered the bathroom, he looked at himself in the mirror, half expecting to see someone else, but from the looks of it, he was still the same. The only thing wrong with him was his fast-beating heart, and the system was there to tell him. Then he noticed something else. His bloody hands that had touched the steak were in his mouth. He pulled them out quickly, but it was already too late. When he had checked the system, he had licked them clean, and he could still taste it. Even worse, he enjoyed this aftertaste. After spending some time inside to regain his composure, Gary finally left the bathroom and went to join the others for breakfast. The TV was on while they ate. Amy refused to talk to him and was just giving him the cold shoulder. Similarly, his mother had also stayed quiet. Gary was unsure whether it was because she was mad at him or just too sleepy. In front of him was a sliced ham sandwich. It didn't take long for him to finish it, and afterward he decided to check the status of one of his quests. 28/2000G of meat consumed. The single slice of ham only weighed 28 grams. If possible, he would like to test if completing the quest would give him the promised EXP, and if he could eventually level up just like in those games. Unfortunately, there was a large barrier. Meat was expensive. He still had the $500 of upfront payment in his pocket, but this amount of money could help their family a lot. In recent news, it looks like the Altered Hunters have struck again, this time killing an Altered in his own home. Just like in previous cases, their calling card had been left in the victim's household. Altered Hunters, huh? Gary thought. If he really was an Altered, they might be something he needed to worry about in the future. Not everyone liked the idea of Altered existing. Those Altered Hunters seemed to believe that this kind of power should either be something that everyone should have access to, or no one. In other Altered-related news, 3 mutilated corpses have been found at a construction site in the small town of Slough. The extent of their wounds suggests that an Altered had been involved in what the police currently assumes to be a gang trade gone wrong. According to the found evidence, all 3 deceased have successfully been identified as members of a certain gang. Although the blood of a 4th person has been found at the crime scene, the police have been unable to find the corresponding person currently believed to be the killer Altered. The police have offered a reward for any hints leading to. Gary had stopped listening to all the words after the news. Great. Now the police are after me as well. Today, Gary was walking to school a lot slower than he usually would. He was constantly looking around his surroundings, checking if there wasn't anybody following him. He had recognized the 3 deceased gang members on TV as the same ones who had been after him at the construction site. The underdogs must have tried to get their package back. Whatever was inside must have been important enough for them to have killed the gang members. If they killed them that easily, then what are they going to do to me? The unknown blood, it has to be mine from the stab wound. Gary thought. Then he thought back to the system and the news report of how it was an altered's doing. He stopped in the middle of the pathway and gulped. At least I hope it was the underdogs. It couldn't be, could it? I would have remembered something like that. Shaking the horrible thought from his head, he decided that he better hurry to school. It was about the only thing that was normal at the moment for him. Ark! A loud piercing shriek was heard. Looking around, Gary discovered the female shriek to have originated from an alleyway close by. The poor girl was surrounded by 4 guys who had brought her there, with one of them currently pinning her up against the wall. His neighborhood wasn't exactly the best, but for something like this to happen in broad light so early in the morning, really, is it just that kind of day? Gary's initial reaction was to just walk away. He didn't want to get involved, especially since there was nothing he could realistically do against 4 adult men. After all, he was no hero, but merely a teenager. Besides, if they were about to commit such an atrocity, who was to say that they were unarmed? Maybe they would do more than just beat him up if he tried to interfere. The group of males continued to push her down the alleyway, out of sight from the main road, around the back of one of the apartments. At this point, when the girl turned the corner, Gary's sharp eyes spotted something on her uniform. It was his school's crest. She went to the same school as him. Damn it, my own arse is already on the line. Should I try and bluff, telling them I'm part of the underdogs? No, that won't work. Given my age, it's clear that I'm merely a transporter. And using their gang name might not be the best idea. Shit, why did it have to be a girl? In all honesty, if it had been a guy, then Gary wouldn't have struggled this much. People were struggling all over the world and had bad things done to them. He knew that since he himself had even joined a gang in hopes of a better future. However, when he saw a girl being abducted, especially in his own neighborhood, not too far from where he lived, he couldn't help but imagine the men doing the same thing to his sister. Who knew whether she had a brother? Who would blame himself for the rest of his life that he hadn't been there? Even if she was an only child, what about her parents? Gary considered creating a ruckus. Looking around, there weren't many others that would help, and if he explained the situation, he knew no one would for fear that the group of men belonged to one of the gangs. It was easier to just hide their head in the sand, pretending not to have noticed the situation, telling themselves there's nothing they could do. Alternatively, he could try to call the police, but one of the things he had learned in the underdogs was that the police reacted slowly to such cases, not only because they were understaffed, but also because those higher up had been paid off to make sure the response time was delayed. By the time they would actually get here, whatever those guys were planning would have already happened by now. Looks like I gotta figure this one out myself, Gary thought. As soon as he had made the decision to act, a notification screen appeared in front of him. New quest received. Save the girl. You have assessed that there are no other options, and you're the only one she can rely on. Are you really going to turn your back on her now? It's time for you to show off your new skills. New skills? That's right. I'm an altered now. Well, at least I think I am. I have super healing and good eyesight. Hey, system, how the hell am I supposed to beat them with those things? Do you want me to act as their punching bag? Get away. Gary heard the girl scream again, but it was quickly muffled up. He knew he didn't have the time to think about what to do next. If there was one thing he was known for, it was his tendency to just act. Right now was no different. His legs had started moving, and he was already heading down the alleyway. When he took the turn, he could see one of the guys with his hands over the girl's mouth. The group of men turned their heads, and they didn't look like the friendliest bunch, that was for sure. Most of them were wearing similar clothing. Baggy trousers with a black top of some kind. A color gang? Damn it. I should have noticed sooner. No wonder they were able to act so brazenly in broad daylight. Color gangs usually were university students or high school students. Some of them worked under one of the large main gangs. But to Gary's knowledge, there shouldn't be any color gang in the underdogs that wore the color black, which was a relief. Kid, we're feeling nice, so why don't you just get out of here and head back to school? One of the men at the back waved him off after recognizing him as just a stupid brat. Gary looked at the school uniform, confirming he and the girl did indeed go to the same school. He was most likely looking for an excuse to avoid the current situation, but then he saw the fear in the girl's eyes again. She even had a similar hairstyle to his sister, only that her hair was black. Seeing this was just building up the rage inside of him. 4 of them, I'm going to get hit a few times, but it can't hurt more than getting stabbed, right? Gary tried to convince himself, committing himself to the situation. He went into a boxing stance as Kirk had shown him. The men started to break out in laughter. Oh, looks like we have a knight in shining armor. All right, let's see what you got, boy. Maybe we'll give you a little invitation. One of the men said, walking forward. Gary waited, focusing on the man's toes. He thought back to when he had landed a punch on the gangster that night, and to everything Kirk had taught him. Not yet, he's still not close enough. Then, when the man was finally in range, Gary threw out a perfect jab that even Kirk would likely praise him for. However, the punch ended up hitting nothing but air. The man had moved to the side and grabbed his fist. Do you have any idea how obvious that punch was? Seriously, if we allowed ourselves to be hit by amateurs like you, we wouldn't be doing what we're doing in the first place. The man berated him as he pulled Gary forward by the wrist. He punched him right in the head, flinging his body backward, yet the man didn't let go and pulled him forward again, this time kneeing him in the stomach. The wind was knocked out of Gary, who was finding it hard to breathe. I was wrong. This pain feels a lot worse than getting stabbed. While the men were distracted watching the beating, the girl saw this as her opportunity to escape. She pulled down the distracted man's hand that had been covering her mouth and bit down as hard as she could. When he let go of her, she followed it up with a kick towards the crown jewels before running out of the alleyway from the other end. Now look at what you have done, one of the men shouted. You let her get away. Now it's going to be 10 times harder to catch her again. Kid, how are you going to pay us back for this? Gary was on his knees, still hurting from the knee to the stomach, when a notification screen appeared in front of him. Quest completed. 40 EXP received. She really got away, huh? But what's the point in EXP if I'm not going to live to see another day? The man had recovered from being hit in his sensitive area and was walking towards Gary heavy-footed. The others went up against the wall, not getting in his way, as he suddenly threw out a kick hitting him right in the head, sending him to the floor. Hey, don't you think you're going too far? You could kill him, one of his companions from the side cautioned, but another one stopped him. Don't try stopping Raph now, or he'll just take it out on you instead. Answer me, Raph shouted at Gary. Do people like this really deserve to live? I'm already beaten. The next kick was aimed at his stomach. If I wasn't the one getting hit right now, would they have done this to the girl? As he had these thoughts filled in his head, his temper was rising, and so was something else. BMP 85. Another kick, again aimed at his stomach, and blood started to dribble out from Gary's mouth. These scum, would they have done this to Amy as well? BPM 120. BPM 125. Running up, Raph went for another kick. Bring that bitch back now, he shouted, but this time his leg was stopped, and looking down, he could see Gary holding it. The girl was running back as fast as she could, and behind her 2 policemen were following. As soon as she was set free, she had gone around looking for help, and had eventually found some that were in the area. It's down here, we have to her dash. She paused, as she looked down the alleyways and could see 4 men on the floor. Some of them knocked out, others rolling about in pain, and the leg of one of them had been bent to an unnatural degree. What happened here? Was it done by that boy from before? When Gary slid the door open to enter his classroom, he was surprised to see that not everyone was there yet. His eyes peeked in the direction of the school clock and could still see there was a good 15 minutes before class started. What, how? I was walking so slow and got caught up in that incident, Gary thought to himself. His hands were still slightly shaking. He still didn't understand what he had done or what had happened just moments ago, right after he dealt with the little problem he had. His body had started to sprint towards the school, getting away from it all, which made him make up for any time that was lost on the way. Still, I shouldn't have arrived this early. Just how fast was I running? Going to his seat, he placed his bag down, and his usual friend Tom was there to greet him. What's wrong with you? You look like, I don't even know how to describe you. You just don't look like your usual self. Tom commented. Thanks for the kind words, Gary replied. In truth, Gary just wished things could go back to normal. School was the one place where he didn't have to worry about his second life as a gang member. However, now, with his whole body going through these weird changes, it was hard to keep everything separate. Actually, I have a question for you. You're into games, books, and all that stuff, so what do you know about werewolves? Gary asked. Tom had a little smirk on his face when this question was asked. Oh, I thought you weren't interested in these types of things. Don't tell me. You're going to ask me the age-old question. Which one is stronger? Or which would you rather be, a vampire or a werewolf? Vampires? No, I just wanted to talk about werewolves. I'm just curious about what they do. Is there anything to look out for? You know I'm terrible at looking these things up on the internet. It was strange that Gary had a sudden interest in these things, but at the same time, Gary would always be obsessed with the next thing he was watching or reading. At one point, he was reading a comic about tennis players and tried to become a professional tennis player. The next time he saw him playing chess after watching a TV series, and before summer he had been fanboying stories about gangs. As such, Tom didn't think much of it, besides it just being Gary's latest obsession, so he decided to humor him. Well, it's hard to say. With these types of things, there's so many different types of lore out there, depending where you get your information from or what you're reading. Silver bullets, magical plants, bites, and more, but they all have one thing in common. On a full moon, that's when a werewolf is at its strongest, and in some stories that's also when they go out of control and eat their closest friends as well. Tom explained, making the actions of a wolf and attempting to scare Gary. However, Gary didn't flinch, nor was he laughing. Instead, he had a very deeply concerned look, and the palm of his hands were feeling incredibly sweaty. Are you sure you're okay? Tom asked. Gary contemplated whether or not he should tell Tom. He was still unsure if he was altered. It was easy to explain his symptoms by just telling him he was one. The problem was then Gary would have to tell Tom everything. How he had come across the strange suitcase, informing him that he had joined a gang, one that was hunting him currently. He couldn't do that to Tom, not after what he had been through. There was also the high chance that telling him anything would involve him in all of this as well. This was his problem, and he was going to solve it. The door slid open once again, and seeing that it was the teacher, the kids got into their seats and stopped their chatter. Their teacher was a skinny male who wore glasses called Mr. Gray. Despite having a reputation for being very strict, everyone still respected him greatly. He just knew the right way to deal with kids. When he entered the room, a student that none of them had seen before followed behind him. Her long gray, ash hair flowed, walking behind the teacher. The color stood out nearly as much as Gary's. When she stood straight, her fringe went just down to her eyebrows. It made her big eyes and small, symmetrical face stand out. The moment Gary saw this girl, something strange started to happen. His heart started to beat, but not just a little. It was to the point where he could feel it pounding in his chest as if it wanted to escape. He could hear it clearly through his ears bonding and banging, overpowering the sound of everything else around him. BPM is rising. BPM 140. BPM 145. While staring at the girl, he had heard a slight creak coming from below. Looking down, he could see that his tight grip around the desk had caused it to break a little. What was worse, his thumbnail had grown and had pierced the top layer of the wood. Oh no, it's happening again. That strange feeling from before, but this didn't happen. Gary started to panic, and it was only raising his heartbeat even higher. BPM 150. These system messages are really starting to piss me off. And his anger only raised his heartbeat even more. BPM 155. Gary started to do the only thing he could to calm himself down. Close his eyes and take deep breaths, trying to think about nothing. Like a monk, think of nothing. Nothing, he continued to repeat inside his head like a mantra. Hello, everyone. A sweet voice greeted the class. My name is Xian Clove. It's nice to meet you all. I recently moved into this town, so I don't know anyone and I'm a little nervous, but the school looks like a good place to be, and I look forward to getting on with you all. Clove, a student mumbled. Isn't that the new mayor's name as well? Oh yeah, you're right. He was the person that wanted to take the town and raise this place from Tier 3 to a Tier 2 city, right? Yeah, everyone has high hopes for him. Hearing all these things, Xian took a little step back, and that's when they noticed that her face had gone a little red. Wait, don't tell me. You're the mayor's daughter. The revelation had caused quite the commotion, and everyone was excited to see someone of importance in their class. Can we have some respect in the room, please? Mr. Gray said in a firm voice, and soon the others quietened down. No matter who she is, I accept that everyone will treat her just like every other student in the room. XIN was given a seat by the window, away from everyone else, and it was quite noticeable that she had gained a lot of attention, not just because of her relation to the mayor, but because she was considered a beauty by the boys as well. Throughout class, for some reason, Gary couldn't help but stare in the direction of XIN, and every time he would do so, his heartbeat would raise and he would have to look away. The one thing it was helping him with was controlling his heartbeat. It helped him find the best method to get in a meditative state to calm it down. Seriously, every time something gets me excited or gets my heart beating, am I going to have this problem? You horny dog, Tom commented, punching him on the shoulder. He had been watching his actions for a while now and noticed he kept staring at a certain someone in the room. Tom, Mr. Gray shouted, are you really interrupting my class again? I know. As a punishment, once school ends, why don't you take Miss Clove and show her around before heading to your club? Damn it, he's in one of those moods today, Tom thought. When the class had ended, it was the end of school lessons for the day, but there was still 30 minutes until they had to go to their compulsory club lessons after school. Hey, so do you want to come with me and take the new girl around the school for a bit? Maybe you two can get to know each other? Tom suggested, giving Gary a nudge while he packed his things. I'm sorry, but there's something else I need to do, and I'm in a bit of a rush. Gary apologized, and before Tom could say anything else, Gary had already left. Gary couldn't control his heart rate just looking at the girl, so he couldn't imagine what talking to her would do. However, this wasn't the only reason why he had refused. Worried about the gang on his back and them finding out where he lived, he needed to tie up any loose ends. And there was a really big loose end in the school. There was one person in school he needed to speak to, Kai. He was the person who was a fellow student and also the person who had introduced him to the underdog gang in the first place. Seeing his friend storm out of the room, Tom couldn't help but think Gary was acting weird. When turning to look at his desk, that's when he noticed something. From both ends of the desk, the wood had been destroyed. It looked like it was done with someone's bare hand using their grip alone. But that wasn't possible, for a human at least, given that whatever had been in the suitcase had been able to change Gary into an altered, or at least an altered-like being. The underdog should be desperately looking for him by now. However, judging by the fact that Gary didn't see any of the gang's members waiting for him by the school entrance, he could only assume Kai hadn't informed them yet, for whatever reason. It was the end of the day, so Gary knew where Kai would be. Everyone at their school was required to attend some extracurricular activity clubs. Since it was impossible to circumvent this mandatory requirement, Kai had somehow talked the teachers into letting him create an astrology club. Unsurprisingly, he was the club's only member, but since he actually stayed at school for that period of time, the teachers left him be. Opening the doors that led to the roof, Gary could see Kai standing up against the surrounding outer fence, looking down at the school field. His bleach blonde hair blew in the wind, along with the dangly earring on his left ear. It was as if Kai was posing for a K-pop photo shoot. It didn't hurt that he totally had the looks to go with it as well. Gary didn't swing that way, but he could easily imagine how a girl would swoon over Kai after seeing the picturesque scene in front of him. Kai, Gary called out as he carefully strolled over to him, making sure to pay attention to his surroundings. He got ready to sprint away in case this turned out to be some sort of elaborate trap. I need to speak with you. Watching Gary act so paranoid, Kai tried to stifle his laughter, but eventually burst out to Gary's surprise. Don't worry, the underdogs don't know that you're here. The older student informed him as he wiped away a tear from all that laughter. I was sure you would come to me, and you're right on time. Looks like they already did try and contact him. Just how much does he know, and why hasn't he reported me yet? Did he want to make sure I wouldn't try and run away first? You've really caused quite a commotion. I knew you were desperate for money, but I thought the underdogs were paying you well. From what I've heard, you're actually regarded as quite the capable and reliable transporter. So, just how much did the other side pay you to bring them the package? Kai asked Gary. His face didn't change, making it hard for Gary to judge whether this was a trick question or just pure curiosity. That's not what happened. Gary protested vehemently. He would have loved to explain what had really happened. Alas, it was impossible. The situation was just too crazy to be regarded as anything but some bad excuse from a teenager. What's worse, if someone were to actually believe him, Gary had the feeling that the consequence for him might be far worse. Yeah, you're right. You've never struck me as the double-crossing type. You care too much about your family to try something like that. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the whole reason you wanted me to introduce you was for the sake of your sister Amy and your mother, right? Hearing this, Gary's heart started to thump louder and faster. The situation at Gary's home had turned for the worse a few months ago. He had noticed that more and more letters had come through the door, and he was beginning to suspect that his mom was hiding a great pain behind the smile she would give him every day. Desperate to help out, Gary needed to find a way to make money, but being only 16 years old prevented him from doing any official work. The only thing he could do was a paper route, although that paid peanuts, and you were competing with around 100 12-year-old boys that wanted to do the same thing. While thinking hard about the best thing to do, he walked past a particular student in the hallway. Kai Hamper. As he swung his arms, Gary saw his designer black and gold watch shining brightly. His limited edition trainers cost more than the wardrobe of Gary's entire family put together. Finally, sitting there at eye level, he wore a unique, thick gold chain that he was sure was made out of 24-karat gold. Kai was a student that just screamed wealth. It was strange, as being in a tier 3 city meant there weren't many wealthy people. Still, it wasn't completely impossible. There were a couple of reasons for wealthy people to live in a lower-tier city. The most common one would be having a company based in that city, or they had decided that trading some guaranteed safety for the chance to live like a king instead of a commoner would be worth it. After all, houses and apartments prices rose to ridiculous levels as you went up the city's tiers. A mansion in a Tier 3 city could only get you a small apartment in Tier 1. Whatever the case, ultimately a kid who was barely older than Gary had access to a lot of money. Plucking up the courage and concerned about his family's situation, Gary went to pay him a visit one day. It was lunch break, and Gary was met with surprise as he saw Kai sitting at the very back on his own staring out the window, even though he had all that money. He wasn't eating anything, nor was anyone paying him any attention or bother. Pulling a chair up from one of the empty seats, Gary sat next to him at his table. "Do you mind?" Gary asked. What Gary didn't realize at the time was that Kai was a person that was avoided in the school. He never really paid any attention to those things, but Kai often got into fights, and there were rumors about where he had gotten his money from. But even if Gary had known about these rumors, it still wouldn't have stopped him. "I came here to ask you, how do I make money?" Gary asked. "I came here to ask you, how do I make money?" Gary asked. "I know I don't know who you are or what you do. You might just be some kid who has a rich parent, but whatever it takes, if you want me to be your lackey, bring you food in the morning, I don't care. I just need the money." Even when Gary had propped himself on Kai's table, he still seemed uninterested, and it wasn't until Gary spoke that he turned his head and a smile was shown on his face. This kid, his eyes, his determination to do whatever it takes, huh? Well, let's see how long you last. Kai thought. After that day, Gary had learned how Kai made his money, and Kai had become Gary's in person to join the gang. "Relax, I haven't told him anything," Kai informed Gary since the younger boy had grown silent. "Still, you're not wrong to be cautious. They seem to be very keen to find you. I don't know what exactly you took from them, whether it was important or rare or something like that, but it's already too late to simply return it. Right now, it's just the principle of the matter. You stole from them, so they need to punish you for what you have done. It's been quite a while since someone last dared to cross the underdogs, so they likely have something gruesome in store. You know, to send a message to others." Of course, Gary already knew everything Kai had said. Still, hearing it from someone else was just making matters worse. "Fortunately for you, I don't plan to tell the underdogs about you," Kai told him with a giant grin on his face. "Oh, he won't? Why would he be looking out for me? We're not friends or anything like that, barely acquaintances. There has to be something he wants from me." Gary became wary about Kai's generosity. "Ooh, you seem to catch on rather quickly. Indeed, I don't plan to simply help you out," Kai admitted. I want to ask you for a favor which will benefit both of us. You see, for a while now, I've planned to leave the underdogs. However, if that would be so easy, you wouldn't be in your current situation. Now think about how much worse it's for me, who knows so much more about their gang. Still, it's not like it's completely impossible. What do you think we would need to do to protect ourselves from a gang like the underdogs? Kai asked with a mischievous grin. Gary wasn't completely sure if Kai actually wanted him to answer the question or not. But in case he did, Gary had no clue what the right answer would be. Otherwise, he wouldn't be in his current predicament. All of this seemed to be some sort of spiel from Kai to get Gary's help. The strange thing was that as far as he knew, Gary didn't have anything to offer Kai. No longer waiting for Gary to come up with an answer, Kai enlightened his underclassmen. It's actually quite simple. We would have to be part of a bigger gang. Of course, just joining another one is out of the question. The underdogs could simply pay off whoever we go to hand us out. As such, our only choice is to create our own gang that is bigger and more powerful than the underdogs. That's where you come in. You will be my little dog in all this. You will help me grow our gang. Gritting his teeth, Gary was annoyed at the fact that Kai was calling him a dog, but he had to put his emotions aside. What Kai was suggesting was crazy for more reasons than one. The problem was this crazy person could report him at any time. He held all the cards while Gary had none. Gary was smart enough to understand that threatening to reveal Kai's wish to leave the gang wouldn't help him in any way. Going against Kai would risk getting his family involved. Not to mention, he could simply deny Gary's accusation. If it came down to it, who would the gang believe? The boy they assumed had stolen from them, or the boy who had worked with them for a long time, who also happened to have told them where to find Gary? How would that even be possible? The other gangs won't follow someone in secondary school. They already have a base of strong people, and those in university are already part of different color gangs. It's impossible to form a gang. Gary argued, trying to put some reasoning behind his plan. Lifting his hands up, Kai did a little spin. Where are we right now? Did you forget? Aren't there plenty of people to use right in this school? Why do the gangs use us as transporters? It's because people underestimate us high school students. There are plenty of us that are strong and love to fight, and I have my ways to persuade them. The gangs think of us as nothing but kids, but soon enough we will be adults. It starts off small, but eventually we can create something greater than all of them. Now tell me, Gary, are you with me or not? Kai asked, walking over, holding out his hand as he looked into Gary's eyes. This person is crazy, but what choice do I have? Gary thought as he shook Kai's hand. Fine, but you have to promise not a single word to anyone in the underdogs or the other gangs about me or my family. Of course, you have my word. At that moment, a notification screen had appeared. A spoken deal has been made. Would you like to mark Kyle Hamper? There was no other information displayed about what a mark was or what it did. Gary tried to ask the system, but by the time he did, Kai had let go, and the system message had disappeared. Whatever it was too late to implement now. Kai waved Gary off as he walked back to look down on the school field. Leaving the roof, Gary rushed off to prepare for his own club activities. Turning around, he briefly saw Kai grin at him. So are you really sure he was the one who defeated the members of that color gang that was chasing after you today? Kai asked. From behind a roof storage room, a girl with black hair stepped forward. No doubt about it. I don't know how he did it, but all of those guys were rolling over by the time I returned with the police. Hearing the response, Kai's grin got even wider. It sounds like this is going to be an exciting year. Oi, Gary, get over here and check out yesterday's altered fight highlights. Tom shouted across the classroom. The lunch bell rang, echoing through the halls. Instead of pulling out a packed meal, Tom yanked a tablet from his desk drawer, propped it up, and loaded up PoTube, the #1 video platform. Within seconds, a crowd of curious classmates swarmed around his desk, eyes glued to the screen. After the conversation with Kai, Gary was stomping his foot on the ground, twisting it about in the grass. The whole conversation with Kia had put him in a sour mood. Hey, are you okay, bro? Tom whispered to his buddy. I don't know where you went, but I think it's best you calm down before you get called up. At the moment, both of them were taking part in their mandatory extracurricular club activity, Rugby. It It would be an understatement to say that Gary wasn't really in the mood for it. The two boys sat on the bench along with the rest, while Mr. Root was giving his typical lecture. The gist of it was that they were going to try the same thing today as they had done last time, as they had shown enough talent to be selected for the team. Not that Gary was paying too much attention to what the coach was saying anyway. He was more preoccupied with the agreement he had just made. He didn't know when, but during their conversation on the roof, Kai had somehow managed to slip Gary what was known as a burner phone, a phone often used by gangs. They weren't digital like smartphones, and instead just had the normal physical dealing buttons with a poor screen display. He was also given a new number that Gary wasn't even aware of. I don't even know when he slipped it over to me. Gary thought. He only realized when in the middle of his walk, something started to vibrate in his pocket. On the screen, there was a message. "This is your new phone. Don't give this number to anyone. Whenever I need to contact you, I will do so through here. So remember to keep it charged, -3. So he really is going to treat me like his loyal dog to do his bidding. Before his anger could get the better of him, he reminded himself just why he had joined a gang in the first place. For the sake of his family. No matter what he needed to do, his priority was to keep his family safe from the underdogs. If that meant he had to become Kai's personal dog for a while, then so be it. Personally, he found it a lot more annoying to be ordered around by someone so close to his own age, but that was something he would have to swallow. "What is wrong with you kids?" Mr. Root shouted in his deep, booming voice. Apparently, Gary hadn't been the only one who hadn't been paying attention to Mr. Root. Even Tom seemingly considered picking his nose to be a more fruitful activity. "It seems you guys need some motivation. Luckily for you, I know just the thing that would have rattled my behind when I was your age." Blowing on his whistle, it was Mr. Root's signal to cue in their surprise. At that moment, walking from a school playground onto the field were a group of girls who were still in their school uniform. A couple of boys who looked to be from years above were carrying a couple of benches around with them and placed them on the field for the girls. Immediately, Gary noticed that the new girl XIN was among the spectators. "Hey, calm down, buddy, or your little soldier might pop out," Tom teased him. The very next moment, Gary looked down on the ground and started taking deep breaths. Tom might have only been jesting, but a teenage boy's hormones truly were no joke. Just thinking about the possibility elicited some type of reaction in his pants. "You know, XIN's a cool girl. You should have accompanied us. She actually likes playing video games, and I'm not talking about those cheap as casual mobile games. Also, she seems to be into martial arts. I believe she might even practice some kind herself. Oh, and get this, the best thing about her, she friggin' loves altered fights. She's like the perfect girl. Something's got to be wrong with her, right?" Tom further nudged his buddy Gary on, expecting some type of reaction. "Hey," Gary said, taking in a deep breath and a slight pause. "Gary, first you scare me by saying weird things and doing strange things. You would tell me if there was something wrong with you. Yeah, bro," Tom thought, but was too afraid to say this out loud to him. Tom was afraid of rejection in the end, and he didn't want to seem pushy, especially since Gary was his only friend. "I think I'm feeling better now," Gary said, lifting his head up and his face slightly red. Tom sighed and wiped his forehead. Normally, he would have had another snarky reply, but something was clearly off about Gary today. Now that we have an audience, some of you might actually start to take things seriously. I bet some of you will be looking to impress these sweet young ladies. And if you aren't able to do that, then you should feel embarrassed for wasting their time, having to watch such a pathetic display of sport. Mr. Root screamed. Just like last time, Blake was made to carry the ball, and the coach would call a group of 3 people from the bench to try to successfully take the ball from Blake. Unsurprisingly, nothing really changed now that the girls watched them. Eventually, after everyone else had failed, Gary, Tom, and Brick were called up to be the defenders. Gary dragged his feet across the ground and didn't look up once, too afraid of what might happen if he caught a glimpse of XIN again. If he were to transform with all eyes on him, the situation would be disastrous, didn't even cover it. "Hey, what the hell is wrong with him? Why is he walking so strange?" one of the girls whispered from the sideline. "I think he might have crapped his pants." Another one made fun of him in a hushed tone. "Why is his hair so green? Does he want us to mistake him for grass?" A third one badmouthed him. Even though they were a fair distance away from the girls, Gary could hear it all. He could hear his heartbeat, the boys and all the girls talking about the boys, including him. Naturally, everyone had nothing but good things to say about Blake, but then something interesting caused Gary's ears to twitch. "Hey, XIN, as the new girl, who do you have your eyes on?" One of the girls surrounding her asked. With XIN being the mayor's daughter, there were plenty of girls who wanted to befriend her. "It has to be Blake, right? All these other boys are a bit immature and strange if you ask me. Like, can you believe it? They get far too obsessed with those altered fights. Why would you find two people hitting each other fun? I just don't understand it," another girl commented. "Oh," XN replied in surprise. "I actually like those altered fights a bit myself. As for the boys, I agree that Blake has potential. His muscles are built solidly, and his lean body frame allows for fast movements. His reflexes so far have been amazing as well. However, if you mean romantically, then I'm not interested in any of them. Maybe if one of these boys could beat me in a fight, then I would be impressed." Her words had stunned the other girls, and they didn't really know what to say. Right? I guess those altered fights are a little cool. Hee hee, the one who had just made fun of the sport had quickly changed her tune. What a bunch of fakes, XIN thought to herself, but outwardly kept her nice appearance. This is exactly why I told Dad that I didn't want to transfer here, or at least under a fake name. Gary had heard all from the field, and specifically he was repeating in his head what was the last thing XIN had said, that if someone could beat her in a fight, then she might show a bit of interest. A smile appeared on Gary's face. If I beat Blake here, won't it show her that I'm strong? Maybe that will get her interested in me. Quest received. Who the girl of your dreams? At your age, boys only care about two things, money and girls. So act as if your life depended on it, and show her who the alpha is. Task: retrieve the ball from the opponent. Reward 10 EXP. Gary was a little bit distracted by the new quest popping up right in front of him, but the piercing sound of the whistle quickly snapped him back into action. Blake was running towards them, with the ball gripped tightly. Passing Tom was easy enough, as his best friend just stood there like a plant. "Tom!" Mr. Root shouted enraged. I'm going to. Just get off the field, you disgrace," he shouted as he kicked a patch of grass. Brick attempted to get the ball, but as usual, an athlete like Blake easily avoided the grab, leaving only Gary, who was now intentionally hyping himself up. BPM 130. BPM 135. BPM 140. His pulse didn't stop rising, and Gary wasn't trying to control it. Running forward, a large piece of mud with grass was thrown into the air, and Gary shot off like a rocket towards his schoolmate. Blake didn't even have time to react, and the only thing he could do was go for a spin. I'm faster than before. I can do it," Gary thought triumphantly. When Blake had finished his spin, Gary was right there in front of him. The two of them collided, with Gary's shoulder and Blake's shoulder banging into each other. Defying everyone's expectations, the one to fly through the air with the ball still in his hand was none other than Blake, despite his larger size. Not letting his eye off the ball, Gary followed up with a great leap that would even make some professional basketball players jealous. When the two landed on the ground, Gary was the first one to get up with the ball held in his hand. I got the freaking ball," Gary shouted with joy, holding in his hand a deflated ball that his thumb had managed to pierce through. "Excellent," Mr. Root shouted. "Now that's what I call a tackle. Congratulations, you're officially off the bench." Out of the corner of his eye, Gary decided to take a peek towards the girls. Most of them were saying horrible things about him for hurting the school's superstar, but he didn't care about their opinion. He was only interested to know what XIN thought about him. "What a crazy good jump," the girl muttered to herself. Although this was in no way a direct compliment, it was nevertheless enough for Gary for now. Maybe this werewolf thing isn't so bad after all. I will just have to learn to control it. 13 days until the next full moon. The sooner, the better. If you're not here in 5 seconds, I'm hitting play without you, Tom warned. He glanced sideways. Gary wasn't paying attention. Under his desk, Gary's knees bounced nervously, hands fiddling with his phone. Tom frowned. From where he sat, it looked suspicious. "Bro, are you seriously doing that in class? At least sneak off to the bathroom." "Just a sec," Gary snapped, too focused to care. On his phone, a message blinked back at him. Be there this evening at 6. It was the 5th time he'd tried to type a reply, only to delete it each time. Nothing seemed right. Finally, frustrated, he sent a single letter, K. 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 Who does this brat think he is? A man on the other end of the message slammed his fist on the table. By the time Gary shoved through the crowd, Tom had already started the video. On screen, 2 ripped fighters stepped into a cage, abs flexed, muscles shining under the lights. In the blue corner, undefeated with 13 wins, weighing 200 pounds, Kirk Summerfield, the announcer roared. The tall fighter, with a sharp goatee and spiked black hair, raised his fists. Facing him, with 10 straight wins, weighing 190, Sam Dillpickle. The shorter bald man grinned with a creepy smile, soaking up the cheers. Hey, don't they look kind of like Tom and Gary? Someone from the crowd laughed. Holy crap, they really do. The classroom erupted in laughter. Everyone except Tom and Gary. Gary, 16, hair dyed green over summer break, was known for pulling stunts like that. What he wasn't proud of was being completely hairless everywhere, except in one place. A fact his classmates unfortunately knew all too well thanks to one disastrous PE class incident that earned him a week's detention. Tom, on the other hand, was his opposite, quiet, introverted, with a buzz cut so short he might as well have been bald. He hated small talk so much he refused to go through cashier lines at supermarkets, preferring machines that didn't ask questions. Still, somehow, the odd pair had become inseparable. Back in the fight, the bell rang. Ladies and gentlemen, our altereds are going all out from the start, the announcer's voice boomed. Kirk's skin shifted yellow, black spots appearing across his arms, claws sprouting from his fingertips as fur spread across his face. His opponent's body changed too. Sam's cheeks bulged, his legs bent and webbed, his tongue whipping out like a toad's. Cheetah-type altered versus frog-type altered, the announcer shouted. This is going to be wild. The transformations took seconds. Sam lashed out first, his tongue wrapping around Kirk's forearm. Disgusting. Kirk snarled, muscles swelling as he flexed. With one brutal slash, he severed the slimy appendage. Yes. Gary pumped his fist. Come on, Kirk. Kirk blurred forward, faster than any human should move. Sam leapt high with frog-like legs, but Kirk caught him midair and smashed him to the mat. Moments later, the referee raised Kirk's hand. Winner, rookie champion, $10 million richer. The crowd in the classroom cheered almost as loud as the live audience. Altered fights were the biggest sport in the world, part spectacle, part proof of humanity's new evolution. Fossilized remains of ancient beasts have been infused into people, birthing altereds, hybrids of man and monster. Faster, stronger, more durable, even resistant to disease. Superhumans for a new age. But fossils were rare, the DNA priceless. Only the wealthy or those backed by powerful corporations could afford to become altered. The fighters they watched today weren't self-made. They were sponsored. Still, for kids like Tom and Gary, altereds were real-life superheroes. And while most kids dreamed of power for glory, Gary's eyes were locked on the giant check handed to the victor. $10 million. His pupils practically turned into dollar signs. For Gary, altereds weren't just heroes. They were the quickest ticket to wealth, fame, and everything he ever wanted. Little did he know that obsession would drag him down a path darker than he could ever imagine. A sharp whistle cut through the air, piercing the ears of every student on the school field. It was the signal for warm-up, 2 full laps around the track. Classes might have ended, but the day wasn't over. Physical training was mandatory. At the back, Gary squinted up at the giant clock on the school building. His vision blurred as the hands ticked in place. He hated his failing eyesight. To him, wearing glasses was nothing more than admitting weakness, admitting bad genes. Something the altered didn't have. He narrowed his eyes, pressing his hands to the sides of his face, a trick he'd learned to focus during class. 3:30. Still plenty of time. Move it, broccoli head, unless you want my size 12s planted in your backside. Coach Root bellowed. The man was massive, a trunk of a human being. With his bulk and height, Gary sometimes wondered if the teacher's DNA had been spliced with an ancient tree. Not eager to push his luck, Gary jogged forward, falling in a step beside Tom, who was already panting like he was about to keel over. "Why do they want to kill me?" Tom gasped between each labored breath. "You know it's easier to breathe if you don't talk and run at the same time," Gary pointed out calmly. He could have left Tom behind, but he never did. It was their routine. Tom slowed, giving up the pretense of keeping pace with the class. "Much better. Internet says jogging should be at a pace where you can still talk." Yeah, pretty sure they didn't mean walking. Gary smirked as they mimicked running motions with their arms, barely moving forward. Their act didn't fool Coach Root. "Get over here, you vegetables." Once the class regrouped, Root dropped a rugby ball at his feet and called out Blake, the golden boy of their year. Tan skin, perfect curls, lean muscle. He was the kind of guy who looked ripped straight out of sports drama. The type both girls and coaches adored. Tom leaned in. "You know they say 10% of the boys match with 90% of the girls, right? Binder proves it. Not that I use it. I just swipe left on everyone so I can reject them first." Gary barely listened. His eyes were fixed on Blake, not out of jealousy for his looks or popularity, but because someone like Blake was the perfect candidate to be chosen as an altered. And if people like him existed, where did that leave someone like Gary? Root clapped his hands. "Listen up. Blake might be the best we've got, but there are plenty of Blakes out there. What this team lacks is defense. Tacklers. Today, your job is to stop him. Either strip the ball or take him down." One by one, students tried and failed. Then it was Gary's turn. The whistle blew. Blake charged forward, a human bulldozer. Amazing performance. Did you all see that? Mr. Root seemed to be ecstatic at Gary's performance. Last week he was laying on his arse, and now he put Blake on his backside instead. Honestly, even Gary was impressed with his own performance. Something like that would have been impossible for him before. Although being able to follow Blake's movements, he had always lacked the strength or speed to act on it. So this was a huge improvement. "You're on the team and will be playing in the first match, Broccoli Head." Mr. Root shouted as the field was being cleared up, as it was the end of practice for the day. Gary, for a brief second having forgotten about what had happened to him, suddenly noticed that Blake was still on the ground and quickly came over, offering him a helping hand. "I'm sorry about that. You're not hurt or anything, are you?" Gary asked, worried that he might have scratched him or broken a few bones. He had yet to find out just how strong he was in comparison to a human, something that he had not taken into account in all his excitement. "Don't worry, I'm a lot better than you were yesterday," Blake answered jokingly as he accepted Gary's hand. He could see that Gary wasn't paying attention to him directly, for his eyes were aimed right past him toward the girls who were leaving the field. "Seems like Coach's method really got you motivated," Blake thought with a smile. The others got to work clearing the rest of the field, putting away the cones and the balls that would be used for practice. Tom was one of these helpers, and he was also the one to have stumbled upon the very ball that Gary had taken out of Blake's hand. Picking it up, he noticed that it was completely deflated, and when turning it around, he could see there was a large puncture wound. One could have still been a coincidence, but the football had 5 going into the ball, as if someone had pierced it with their fingers. First the desk in class, and now the ball. "Gary, what the hell did you do?" "No, this isn't a movie or some book. I'm sure there has to be a perfectly normal explanation for this. But then why did you ask me all those questions about werewolves earlier?" At this moment, Tom was feeling more distant from his friend than ever, as the whole rugby team had congratulated him on his performance and welcomed him onto the team. Walking back home, Gary had a huge smile on his face. It had been one horrible day, followed by one of the best days of his life, he mused, but soon he was reminded by the troubles he still had to face. "My heartbeat, it looks like the faster it gets, the more it affects my transformation. Shit, doesn't that mean if I get too excited, I might fully turn? How the hell would I explain suddenly growing fur or becoming larger? And what was that thing with the mark when I shook Kai's hand earlier?" Thinking about this, he opened up the system screen, and information about the mark was displayed. Bond mark. A bond mark is a type of marking you can leave when you have made a sincere promise with another party. Those that are marked are given a unique scent, allowing the user to track down the bond at any point in time. If the promise gets broken, the marking will break as well. Those with a broken mark will automatically become hunting targets. Additional stats will be awarded if one manages to successfully hunt their target down. Gary grabbed the side of his head, cursing himself for not having taken advantage of the opportunity to mark Kai. Wait, is the mark invisible, or at least something only I can see? Wouldn't that raise a ton of questions otherwise? Then he gulped as he thought about the second part. Successfully hunt down a target. So does the system want me to kill them? Trying to forget about the negative side, Gary started to think about something more positive and thought back to the game when he had snatched the ball from Blake. The quest gave me 10 EXP just for that alone, coupled with the 40 EXP I got for defeating those guys earlier, means I'm halfway to a level up. Just what will happen once I reach 100 EXP? Will I just get stronger, or perhaps I will gain an ability or a skill? Thinking about this reminded Gary that he still had to try to complete the other quests. One of them was eating 2 kilograms of meat a day, and the other required him to join the gym. With the prepayment from his old gang job, he still had a wad of cash on him to go for the latter. I guess it wouldn't hurt to try it. He headed toward the high street gym and paid them the one-day trial fee. He was ready to work out. There were a few people inside the gym that looked at him as he entered wearing his school clothes, making it clear to everybody inside that he had to be an amateur. What am I meant to even start with? Did the system just expect me to come in here and start lifting? With a confused look on his face, it wasn't long until a friendly trainer approached him. He had a giant smile on his face as he rubbed his hands together. This looks like your first time here. I'm a personal trainer, so if you need any help, I will give you the first lesson for free. It's okay, I dash. No need to be so cautious. As I said, the first lesson is completely free. Here, let me guide you on how to use the equipment. You won't believe how many gym users injure themselves because they do things wrong. So first of all, let's weigh you, and then we'll look at your body fat percentage. With that data, I'll create a personal plan just for you. Not even letting Gary get a word in, he was soon tailored off to the weighing scale, and the personal trainer had him just where he wanted him. These personal trainers, they're worse than car salesmen. I just wanted to try to do my own thing and get out of here. What am I meant to do now? Gary thought, but caught up in the wind. At the end of the day, the guy did say the first lesson was free. After some measurements, the trainer took him over to the bench press. He was quite the buff guy, nearly as muscular as his teacher, Mr. Root. Weight after weight was being put on either end, and soon the trainer was pushing away while describing all the correct points. Is this guy really trying to teach me? Or does he just want to show off in front of the newbie? Finally, the trainer stopped and allowed Gary to try, while he went around the back of the rack to help him in case anything was to go wrong. I've never even been to the gym before. How much weight can I lift? The trainer was looking at the weights on the bar that he still had, and also had his hands ready. He hadn't even removed any of the weight he had originally put on the bars. This kid, I can see he wasn't impressed by my bulging hard muscles. I guess he's never been to the gym before, so he doesn't know how hard this is. When he tries to even lift the weight off the bar, he'll soon understand, and I'll be there to pick the weight off him when he does. The trainer thought. Although it didn't look like Gary had paid too close attention, he had actually remembered each of the points the trainer made, and was now copying his starting position, arching his back slightly. Gary had copied the trainer to the point where he almost looked like a replica. Oh, this kid's form is pretty good. The trainer was surprised, wondering if Gary was just pretending to be new to this. Then, when trying to push the weight of the rack slightly, Gary could feel it budge only slightly. He held his breath and began pushing and pushing. It's no use. BPM 100. BPM 110. BPM 120. Your strength is increasing. Soon the bar was pushed off the rack and lowered down to his chest. He then pushed it back up again, placing it perfectly back, completing one full rep. Wiping the sweat from his head, Gary got off the bench. Did I do a good job? Gary asked. The man stood there stunned and started to look around to see if anyone else had seen what he had just witnessed. This is a joke, right? One of those PoTube videos, surely. He laughed to himself, but when trying to lift the bar up, he could tell the weight was still there. No one had tampered with it. The weight was at least 80 kilograms. How was he able to push that much in one go? You've had your first taste of working out. I'll let you off for now and allow you to complete the quest. but remember to work out daily to get a body fit for a werewolf. Daily quest complete. 10 EXP received. Oh, this is great. I thought I would have had to stay here all day. I'll come back tomorrow. Gary was elated and ran off, leaving his stunned trainer there. Knowing that the system was giving him EXP for completing all these quests, using the money he still had, Gary decided to stop off at the supermarket. Here he grabbed 2 kilograms of meat piled up in his basket, and it was time for him to complete the second daily quest. While walking, though, he suddenly stopped. No, I can't just go and bring back the food. If I cook all of this and eat it in front of Mom, she'll ask where I got the money to buy so much steak from, and they'll think I'm a monster for chugging down so much meat. Pulling the meat he had just bought out of the plastic bag, Gary could see it through the cellophane plastic. The red blood that was dripping off the raw steak, the white marble areas. He never found raw meat apprising before, but for some reason his mouth was just rolling at the sight of it. Looking around, he made sure no one was looking, and then stepped into an alleyway between 2 buildings. He soon found himself using his nail to pierce the plastic, and the scent had immediately hit his nose. There was no second guessing himself. As if he was being controlled by something, his hand grabbed onto the raw meat, and he took a big chunk out of it. Soon he found himself gulping all the food, ripping it through it with his teeth with ease. When all the meat was gone, once again the message had popped up. Daily quest complete. 10 EXP received. Naturally, he wiped his mouth with the sleeves of his shirt, which was now covered in blood. What the hell am I? No regular altered ever said that his instincts got the better of them. Oh God, I really am a monster. Gary lamented having accepted the job that day. Now that he walked home, Gary was depressed as his head was filled with these types of negative thoughts. But when he entered his bad neighborhood, he was soon reminded of why he was doing what he was doing. If this system is really like a game, then when I level up, I should get stronger. Those quests were daily, so I should get them again tomorrow as well, he thought. The problem is, meat isn't cheap, yet neither is joining the gym, and then I still want to help Mom and Amy. To do all this, I'm still going to need money and lots of it. Yet I can't go back to my old part-time job. Racking his head, thinking of anything he could do, he regretfully decided to text one person. I can't go back to the underdogs, but I really need some cash ASAP. Do you have a way for me to make more? Maybe I can help you with something. The text message was sent to Kai. Even though the 2 of them had both belonged to the same gang, he had never seen the other boy work as a transporter. Not to mention his upperclassman was clearly a lot better off than he was, so Gary was willing to bet Kai was doing something else for the gang. No problem. Meet me at the school gate tonight. Just make sure to come alone. Once school was over, Tom had directly headed home. Only today, it had been without his best friend by his side. Honestly, after how weird his buddy had behaved the whole day, Tom was convinced that something was going on with Gary. The broken desk, suddenly being able to send Blake flying, and the pierced rugby ball. Could Gary really be He gulped before allowing his mind to finish his thought. A werewolf? Just one day ago, he would have immediately refused to believe such lunacy. Unfortunately for the current him, it was an answer that would completely and perfectly explain all the strange occurrences today. If Gary hadn't brought it up earlier, it might have never even crossed his mind. As always, Tom was the first one to arrive home. His parents were both scientists working for some important company 1 hour's drive away in a Tier 2 city and were therefore gone for most of the day. He was happy that their income allowed them to live comfortably in this middle-class house, in their middle-class city, although he wouldn't have minded seeing them more often. By the time they came home, they were completely tired out, and working overtime and on weekends was unfortunately rather the norm than the exception. Tom worked extra hard at school to avoid ending up like his parents. His dream was to one day own a huge mansion in a Tier 1 city, surrounded by beautiful maids who would cater to his every wish. Just like Gary, he saw becoming an altered as a surefire way to end up living such a cozy life. However, unlike his best friend, he was also very interested in the technical side surrounding altered. Tom had clearly inherited his parents' curiosity, so he kept up to date on everything in that regard as well, be it whenever new fossils were unearthed or any developments that might allow humanity to gain more altered. Entering his room, it was filled with computers that Tom had hand-built himself. There was more than one tower, and he also had multiple screens with tabs still open from months before. Sitting down at his desk, his hands were slightly shaking as his fingers hovered over the keyboard. If Gary really is a werewolf, and it's like in those movies and books, then on a full moon this could get very dangerous. He could end up hurting everyone, including his mother, his sister, or even myself. With this in mind, Tom knew what to search for, and he started typing away. How to kill a werewolf. As usual, the internet was full of contradicting information. Not counting the sites that claimed that werewolves didn't exist, others made them out to be just supernatural beings, most likely dog types altered, which could be killed similarly to humans. It would just take a little bit more effort. However, this wasn't what Tom was looking for. He just wanted to find an easy method to verify whether Gary was one. The most common answer that came up was to use silver, which was supposed to hurt those creatures to varying degrees, depending on the source. He opened his drawer and pulled out a snake-shaped silver pendant his parents had gifted him on his last birthday. He had never worn it at school because he thought jewelry was a little too tacky and didn't really fit his style. Of course it's a snake, Tom thought as he looked around the room. During his childhood, he had a phase when he had been fascinated by those cold-blooded reptiles, and he had made the mistake of telling his parents exactly that. From that day on, all of his relatives, including his parents, bought him presents pertaining to those creatures, be it snake posters, snake toys, or snake movies. Unsurprisingly, he had long since come to grow to hate them. Still, for once he was glad as he held the silver necklace in his hand. However, just that wasn't enough for him, and Tom wanted something else. After a couple hours of research, he found something else that might work, though the opinions on that were very split. It was a hypothesis that since neither dog nor wolves could digest chocolate, the same was likely true for their werewolves. As dumb as he found the idea to be, it was the best thing he could actually test for. Rushing down to the cupboard, Tom opened it to only be disappointed. I better go out and get some then, Tom thought. It was a little late out at night, and he had heard his parents come home today, of all days. They might be sleepy, but they wouldn't let him go out unless he had a very good reason for it. It didn't take a genius to figure out getting chocolate wouldn't cut it. This left him with no other choice but to sneak out via his bedroom window. It wouldn't be the first time climbing down to leave the house without anyone finding out. Fortunately, there was a shop that should have some not too far away, so Tom wasn't too worried, but just to be safe, he still changed into a hoodie. During the day, it was largely peaceful, but everyone knew that the city had many gangs. Once the sun had set, it wasn't uncommon to run into someone belonging to one of them. Covering his own head made him feel a little safer. It was just a short 10-minute walk to the nearest convenience store, so he gambled on his luck to not encounter any. On the way, he passed through an empty park, and then through a few back streets without a hitch. However, standing outside his destination, there were a few older-looking high school students wearing a black band around either their arms or legs. They were smoking and drinking alcohol with their bikes on the floor. These low lives, is this really how they plan to live? Just hanging outside a shop all day, smoking and drinking? Good luck getting into university. For a second, Tom made eye contact with one of them. What the hell are you looking at, man? One of the men uttered. You look at me like that again, and I'll bust your lip. Tom didn't want any confrontation, so he quickly averted his look and practically rushed inside the shop. He went ahead and purchased quite a few large chloro bars. As soon as he left the shop, he quickly started walking away, ignoring the gang members. I hope this is enough chocolate, Tom thought. The question is, how do I get Gary to eat it without it seeming odd? Walking through the dark alleys back, with only a few lights lighting up the area, Tom was starting to feel nervous. It was dark, and there was no one else around. Suddenly, he heard the sound of students laughing derisively, and a few seconds later, a bike skidded out in front of him, blocking his path. I told you, no one looks at me that way and gets away with it, the one in front told him, while the ones behind him were looking forward to a good show. A horrible situation, was Tom's thought. I told you, no one looks at me that way and gets away with it, the one in front told him, while the ones behind him were looking forward to a good show. This shitty neighborhood. I didn't even do anything to you. I may have thought you were a scum of society, but it's not like I told you that to your face. I never spoke those words out to you. Tom gulped down hard. Outrunning someone on a bike was impossible for someone like him. There were 4 of them, all with a black band around a part of their body, showing their affiliation to a color gang. Tom was considering what to do, but he was afraid resisting or fighting back would just worsen his situation. Looks like there is no way around a beating. I just hope after a few punches he'll get bored and they'll leave. The one Tom had offended hopped off his bike, while the rest stayed on theirs, likely to catch up to him if he tried to make a run for it. Tom had resolved himself to his inevitable fate, so he gritted his teeth, clenched his hands, and closed his eyes as he waited for the impact from the fist that had just been thrown. Instead, he heard a scream from the boy. "My arm! You shithead! This had nothing to do with you. Who the hell are you?" Opening his eyes, Tom saw the boy down on the floor, holding his elbow which appeared to have been broken. He was addressing a man completely dressed in black with a large trench coat, who had suddenly appeared in front of Tom. "Me? I'm just someone who happened to pass by. This world has enough dangers that we humans don't have a need to be fighting amongst each other. Yet here you're ganging up on a defenseless kid. You scum are the worst." The man answered. Since he was in front of him, Tom could only see that the man had long flowing hair and a solid body. Calling him tall would be an understatement. Tom estimated him to be well over 8 feet. As he turned around, Tom got a good look at his face. His savior had a scruffy beard, but overall good looks. It was as if he was staring at an older version of Blake. The other students who hadn't gotten hurt got off their bikes and started to pull out weapons, with the one on the floor taking out a pocket knife. "Don't worry about me. I deal with things a lot worse than these small-time trashes on a daily basis," the man smiled at Tom, as he ran forward to one of the students with a bike chain. The boy panicked and lashed it out, but stepping away, the man avoided it and grabbed it. He then ripped the bike chain out of the other's hands and swung it at the attacker's legs. Tom found it a bit ironic that the man seemed to have better mastery over the boy's weapon. Without taking a break, the man easily dispatched the others one by one. Without breaking a sweat, he had simply knocked the pocket knife from the first boy's hand before kneeing him in the face. Tom had to pinch himself to make sure he wasn't dreaming. He even took a look around to check for some hidden cameras, but of course there were none. There was no one else to witness the 6 of them. It didn't take long, and the man had taken out all 4 of them carefully. "Go home, kid. There are a lot more dangerous things in the middle of the night, and you won't always be lucky enough for a good Samaritan to help you out," the man advised as he started to walk away. Who was that? Tom wondered. There was one more person who had snuck out from home. Only in Gary's case, it was a lot harder to do so. At least it should have been. However, this time, he found it a lot easier to escape their apartment on the top floor. There was a lot more strength in his fingers as he grabbed onto the window ledges and slowly went down until he reached the bottom floor. Even landing on the floor from his height didn't result in any pain to his feet or knees. Gary smirked to himself. Maybe this whole werewolf thing does have more perks than I initially thought. The meeting place set by Kai was in front of the school. He would have usually changed into his normal black and red tracksuit when out, but that was also the uniform given to him by his gang. There was no reason to run around with a target on his back. Instead, Gary had grabbed some plain clothing, just a white top, and some black trousers. When Gary finally arrived, he could see Kai standing there, staring off into the distance, just as he had done on the rooftop. The only thing missing was the wind to make his hair flutter. From a distance, Gary noticed the other one still wearing his black and gold Bolex watch, which just annoyed him even more, but also reminded him why he was here. "I'm here just like you asked. So what's the job?" Gary asked, getting straight to the point. Kai looked Gary up and down and scoffed a little at what he was wearing. "You got here a lot faster than I expected, seeing as I only texted you a short while ago. Did you already happen to be in the area?" Kai questioned back, and Gary just scratched his head nervously and nodded. "Well, it seems to be a good thing, considering your current outfit. There's no way in hell I'm letting you go like that. Here." Kai threw a sports bag over to Gary. "What's this?" Gary asked. Opening it up, he found some clothing inside waiting for him. He was surprised to see that it was just his size, even though he had never told Kai that information. "Have you already forgotten what I told you? We'll be making a new gang, and today you'll be the one to represent us. I don't want us to be one of those poor gangs who wear hoodies and tracksuits and harass people. The first impression counts, and since this will be our debut, You'll need to make yourself look a little nice. Gary looked around, looking for somewhere to change, but the school was already closed and there was nowhere else. Seeing him hesitate, Kai pointed at the floor. It's nearly the middle of the night, so there's nobody to see you anyway. Kai pointed out as he tapped his foot impatiently. Gary wanted to argue that Kai was there, but the other's gaze made it clear that he was starting to get irritated. Unfortunately for Gary, he was depending on Kai and couldn't risk pissing him off. Although he didn't want to, Gary reluctantly got changed in front of the school into the new clothes that Kai had brought for him. Gary now had a small jacket over this white top, without a hood, yet with a collar that popped outward. The trousers were quite tight-fitting, but in a material that expanded, and a matching pair of boots to go with it. In fact, even though the clothes looked uncomfortable, the material was very flexible, making it feel quite nice on his skin. However, there was one thing he didn't like: the colors, making him wonder whether it was his fashion sense that was off or Kai's. Perfect, you actually look half decent now. Don't look at me like that. You should know that every gang has something that symbolizes which gang they're from, Kai started to explain. Before you wore red and black, and now you shall be black and gold. Trust me, with how many gangs there are, this was the best available color combo. Now that Kai had pointed it out, Gary noticed that everything that Kai was already dressed that way. The main color of his clothes was black, with the trim, outline, and the small details golden. Unfortunately, your hairstyle still sticks out like a sore thumb, but we don't have the time to do anything about it. It's something we'll have to solve another time, Kai stated with a smirk as he jokingly made a gesture of cutting them off. At least Gary hoped that it was just a joke. The two of them did not move inside, since the actual meeting place wasn't at the school. The destination was somewhere else, but no matter how many times Gary asked where they were going, after telling him it would be a surprise the first time, Kai ignored his questioning. Eventually, they reached a car park. It was a bit away from the main shopping street and other places, and it also looked a little run down, but Gary could tell from afar that it appeared to be quite lively inside. There were actually people hanging outside who acted as some sort of bouncers. The most surprising thing was that they looked to high school students no older than 18. Finally, following Kai, they entered an elevator and went ahead to the top floor. When it opened, Gary was hit with a wave of cheers and screams, as if he had come to a rave party. What the hell is going on? Gary thought. Looking around, they were all high school students, some even still in their school uniforms, and what they were all cheering at was a fight happening in the center. This is an illegal fighting event for high school students only, Kai explained with a nasty smile on his face. Here's where the strongest students meet up and duke it out amongst themselves to decide who the top dog is. It's pretty impressive for just high school students, right? And this isn't the only one. This is one of the many underground fighting clubs spread through the whole country. Although this is just a small one, Kai revealed to Gary, who was still a bit taken aback at the idea that people his age would gather in secret to watch others duke it out live. If this is considered small, just how large is big for you? Gary found it hard to comprehend, since he guessed that there were at least 500 people present. On closer inspection, he noticed another thing. Those teens and tweens seemed to be gathered in groups, each wearing their own sort of uniform. It looked like a club meeting from all sorts of different schools were going on. Kai, having a keen eye, noticed what Gary was looking at. Remember what I said about many people from different school groups being here? Those school gangs take this thing here quite seriously. The reason they dress the way they do is so they can make a name for themselves. Just like with the gangs, the idea is for you to see their clothing and instantly know who they belong to. It might sound impressive for a bunch of students to organize all of this. It's because the ones responsible are the gangs. Gangs. Gary gulped, looking around to see if he could see any well-known ones amongst them. Do you mean like the underdogs? Referring to the gang Gary used to work at. Kai couldn't help but chuckle seeing Gary acting so nervous. Do you think the underdogs would come down here personally? This here is the very minor leagues. Basically just a gathering of a bunch of no-name schools, or what we refer to as loners attempting to join one of the other gangs, proving their strength. Still, this is technically a recruitment field, and there are scouts from gangs here, but they would be like D-tier gangs. They either absorb one of these smaller gangs into their own, or look at who they can snatch up and join their gang in the future. Since guns are now non-existent, knowing how to use your fists or a weapon is a big deal. At the bigger events, there are even those that are altereds. What Kai was referring to was the Harmful Weapons Act, which came into play a little after they had been born. With how fast and how bad the world had been deteriorating, countries were worried that World War III could start at any moment and humanity would just end up destroying the planet. So a pact was agreed between every single country to get rid of all weapons, nuclear weapons, missiles, tanks, anything of mass destruction. With technology, it was nearly impossible to hide anything from other countries, so they couldn't even build things in secret. This just made the development of altered growth between countries, as they strived to create the perfect human being. What shocked Gary was there were apparently things like this going all over the place that he didn't know about. The underworld was certainly another side that people didn't see unless they were involved in it, and more importantly, invited. So what are we doing here? Gary asked, as the two of them started to push through the crowd, until they eventually reached the outer edge. The onlookers had formed a natural large rounded ring to not interfere with the fighters. For those that were in a difficult position, the fight was being live-streamed, and others could watch it on their phones and devices. Well, remember what I said about loners not belonging to a gang? It's easy to see who is part of one and who isn't by their colors, or more accurately, the lack thereof. Kai pointed out, Gary could see there were quite a few people that weren't wearing any obvious colors, like the ones currently in the ring. Wait, what are you saying? I'm saying we can't create a gang with just the two of us. We need more people. And can you think of a more perfect place other than this? Gary suddenly understood why Kai had more than one pair of clothing in the bag he had handed him earlier. He intended to give it to the new recruits on the spot. Gary watched the two as they fought, wanted to get an idea of just how skilled these fighters would be. Both those in the center looked the same age as him, around 16 or 15 years old. One was a black boy with short spiky blonde hair, wearing a sleeveless shirt. His muscles showed quite well, and he had a couple of scars on his shoulders. His opponent was a larger boy who was nearly twice as big as the first one. It wasn't that the other boy was small, it was just that this one was incredibly large. The two of them exchanged a few blows, and a few punches from the black boy had hit the larger one in the stomach, but he just laughed it off as if it was nothing. Who will win? Inu the warrior or Spike the blob? Last chance to place your bets, everyone. One of the students announced, walking around with a board showing the odds, which were currently in favor of the blob. Interested in placing a bet? If I'm not mistaken, you should have received a nice down payment. Although knowing you probably didn't take any along, so I wanted to lend you some. Kai offered with a wide grin. Watching the two exchange a few punches gave Gary a good idea who he thought would win, but placing a bet was out of the question for him. Although he was sure anything could happen in a fight, especially one like this without any clear rules. He came here to win money, not risk losing it all, and he had a premonition that borrowing from Kai would just be him placing a leash on himself. Is this what you meant when you said we could make money? Gary asked. Nah. As I said, this is just something for fun. I'm merely curious to know who you think would win. Remember, I haven't finished testing out how useful you are to me yet. So far, none of the attacks from Inu the warrior had connected, and it looked like Spike the blob would soon tire him out and beat him. Just then, Inu took a stance where he bent his knees slightly and raised his hand above his head. It looked similar to a boxing stance, but Gary knew straight away it wasn't a boxing stance. I don't gamble, but if I had to place a bet, I would place it on Inu, Gary said, making sure to emphasize his no gambling policy. However, Kai was no longer listening. He brought out a wad of cash and waved the person over to register his bet. All of this on Inu, Kai demanded as he put down what Gary estimated to be at least $1,000. Wait, I told you I don't want to borrow any of your money. Who says it's for you? Don't worry, this is my own bet. The fight continued, and this time the blob got into a downward portion similar to one in American football. He then readied himself and charged forward at a great speed that no one had seen before in the fight. Those that had bet on the blob cheered at this sight. Before they had thought it likely for him to win, but seeing this display of his talent, they were sure of it. Even the scouts from the gangs seemed to consider giving him an offer after this round. At that moment, though, at the right time, using his knee, Inu struck him in the face, using his own force against him. Blood splattered as his nose was broken, the fighter himself thrown back in the air and dazed. Inu the warrior didn't stop there. Using the blob's thigh, he leapt off it and struck down with his elbow at the top of his opponent's head. Inu did this 3 times in a row and gripped onto his head with both of his thighs. Falling to the ground, Inu never let go, and once the blob's body hit the floor, Inu finally rolled over, and there was a clear winner. The crowd erupted in cheers despite some of them having lost their money, as people always love seeing a turnaround, and Inu had given them quite the spectacle. After collecting his own fight money, Inu went to rest, and Spike the Blob was carried off to the side. Just a lucky guess? Kai asked as he was gleefully counting his winnings, that Gary couldn't stop eyeing, now wishing he had made the bet. His stance, although it looked like boxing, he's actually a Muay Thai fighter. They focus on using their knees and elbows. One had fighting experience and was calm throughout the match, never looking worried, while the other was just a street fighter. In other words, your average bully, Gary answered. Kai couldn't help but let out an appreciating whistle, realizing that Gary was more so special than he had realized. He brought out his phones and started to type away, and without looking down, asked Gary a question. So, have you thought about an alter ego name for today? Given that the underdogs still want you to hide using your real name or the fake one you've given them isn't advisable. What would you want as a stage name? A stage name? Gary thought about it for a moment. Given his change, he would pick something werewolf-related. Or maybe something like Silver Fong, but WH dash. Silver Fong won't do. Your hair's green. Kai interrupted him as he finished typing and sent out his message. Next, we have a new fighter fighting for the first time. He wishes to keep his name a secret, but he goes by the name Green Fong. The announcer shouted out to the crowd to hype them up, while Gary had still been connecting the dots. You wanted to make some money, right? Don't worry, I will bet on you, and we can share the profits. This is the best way to get our name out here, so it's time for you to go make us some money, Green Fong, Kyle said with a smile. Before Gary had any chance to refuse participating in the next fight, the crowd opened up a way for him, and with a not-so-gentle push, Kai forced him to enter the arena. The high school students were now looking at him from all over. It felt as if they were seeing right through him, trying to analyze what type of person he was. Was it a mistake to go to Kai? Gary was left wondering. As a fan of altered fights, he had naturally dreamed about being on stage himself. Who would have thought he would get a chance? Only that it would be at an underground fighting club. The spectators did not seem to be too impressed with Gary, as he was pretty average in terms of height. Today had been the first time he had ever visited a gym, so his lean figure did not have any muscles for him to show off. Compared to the last contestants, he just didn't look as if he would last long. Your heart rate is increasing. 90 BPM, 95 BPM, 99 BPM. God damn it, Kai. Why couldn't you have warned me at least? Shit, I have to calm down. With so many people watching, I can't display too much power. Gary worried as he looked around. His fight or flight response kicked in, and he would definitely prefer the latter option until he got a better feel for his newfound powers. Unfortunately for Gary, Kai was nowhere to be seen. Let's now give a big welcome to his opponent. With 15 fights under his belt, he has won 10 of them, Biley Buis's tier. The announcer called out, and the crowd erupted in cheers as a large bald-headed man entered from the opposite side. Billy had his top off, displaying his six-pack of flabs, and, aside from a normal-looking pair of pants, he had a pair of thick gloves on his hands. Boy, you gotta be kidding me. I thought this was high school students only? Why the hell is my opponent a middle-aged man? Gary complained to the announcer, panicking far too much to realize that what he had just said could be heard by everyone, including his opponent. Your opponent might have been held back, but he is merely 19 years old. The announcer explained to Gary, as well as some other newcomers. Thanks for not making me feel bad about giving you a beating. Billy spoke, approaching Gary as he punched his right fist into his left open hand, a large vein sticking out from his head due to his anger. Looks like both of our fighters are ready. Let's get this show on the road. The announcer shouted out, and Gary's system apparently agreed with him as well. New quest received. Win your debut fight. The opponent in front of you is out for blood. Use whatever means necessary to defeat him. Quest reward. 50 EXP. The quest this time didn't make Gary feel any better about the person he had to fight, and through the clear screen, he could see Billy charging right at him, swinging his right fist. The attack seemed sloppy to him, and Gary's improved eyesight allowed him to almost see the very wrinkles on his opponent's hand. His natural instincts kicked in, and he ducked down, avoiding the attack, placing his hands over his face. Having dodged the attack, Gary didn't use the chance to attack the other part. Instead, he started to run away from Billy. After having won his fight, Inu had gone over to the bar counter and had ordered himself a beer, part of the quirks he had received for winning his match. As he had expected, several people had quickly come over, attempting to recruit him over to their teams. It was rare to see a loner who was quite talented and knew martial arts on top of that. Inu had listened to the various offers, but none of them had piqued his interest. Kai had deliberately waited for all the hyenas to disappear, but rather than to directly approach Inu like all the others had done, he had ordered himself a fancy cocktail. Once he had received it, he took a big swig and leaned against the counter from which he had simply started to watch Gary's match for a bit. So far, Green Fong had managed to avoid the wild but powerful swings from Billy a few times, even thrown a couple of them himself. Unfortunately, they all had rebounded off the other's large belly. "Do you fancy yourself a betting man, Inu?" For the first time, Kai addressed the other boy. Inu took a second to reply, as he had started to believe that Kai might have really just come over for a drink. He had noticed that he was dressed in the same colors as the fighter in the arena. The strange thing about that was, although Kai had the looks of a pretty boy, he nevertheless appeared to have the physique of an experienced fighter. Much more so than his buddy, whose only strength appeared to be dodging and running. Even under his clothes, his muscles were apparent, and Inu had a feeling that the other was not only someone who would not shy away from a fight, but might actively seek it. However, most importantly to Inu, the one trait that stood out even more than the others was that this eccentric boy next to him smelled of money. From the hoses he wore to the watch he was wearing on his wrist, all of it looked to be genuine brand-name items. "If I wasn't a betting man, then I wouldn't be here, and I bet with my life every time I fight," Inu eventually replied. "Well, that makes two of us then. Thanks to your performance in the last match, I've already earned a pretty penny," Kai said, as he took out a wad of cash, which he then playfully tossed up. He noticed that Inu's eyes became bigger, seemingly trying to estimate how much it was worth, putting a mild smirk on Kai's face. "I've seen that you've rejected the offers of the other guys. So how about a little wager to make things interesting? In a moment, I will go over to place a bet on Green Fong, winning with the money I used for my earlier bet. If I turn out to be correct, you'll join our gang, and half the payout sum will be yours. We can call it a nice little advance payment for joining the crew. On the other hand, if he loses, all the money you see here will be yours." This wasn't the first underground fight that Inu had appeared at. He had been to quite a few before, and each time he showed off his skills, there would be those that approached him. It was the first time he had been to one of this size, so he thought today would be the day he finally decided to join a gang. To him, it was a stepping stone. These small gangs would be recruited by bigger gangs in the future, or maybe if he stood out he would get on the fast track. But for some reason, when he heard this blonde boy speak, he did so with a confidence different to all the others, which made him want to know more about him. A smile appeared on Inu's face, as this was less a bet and more of a win-win scenario for him. Either way, he would get a lot of cash, but it did serve its purpose to make him intrigued. Suddenly, he started paying a lot more attention to the ongoing fight. Inu recognized that Green Fong was able to see Billy's movements clearly, yet neither his punching nor his kicking showed any signs of being a trained fighter. Between the two of them, there was also another clear difference. Weight class. The weight class of one was too large of a gap to overcome. From a few hits that Gary had landed on his opponent, none seemed to have had any effect, so his downfall would be whenever Billy managed to catch him. In the middle of the fight, he wouldn't suddenly grow in strength. Perhaps he might be able to tire out his opponent, but this arena had something that would culminate that strategy to make things more interesting. If fights took too long, the crowd would start to close in on the fighters, forcefully shrinking down the arena size. Eventually, there would not be enough room for fighters like Gary to evade, in which case a couple of hits from Billy and he would win. Why would I say no to free money? Inu chuckled, holding out his hand, and Kai slapped it, confirming their deal. Although Inu believed there was a low chance of losing the bet, he also wouldn't mind. The way Kai treated money as just something he could throw around leisurely, Inu was sure that joining him wouldn't be entirely bad. Besides, the eyes of that fellow gave off the feeling that he knew what he was doing. Now it's all up to you, Green Fong, Kai thought, as he went over to place the bet. In the middle of the match, Gary made a discovery. Looking at his stats, he noticed that his energy value had dropped by 2 points. His system had only told him that energy would be used to restore his HP when idle, and that meat could be used to fill it up. Apart from that, he had been under the impression that it would function as a sort of a stamina bar. Despite all the running and wild swinging he had been doing, he still felt like he could go on for hours, so if it was that, then he had far more stamina than a normal human. He just had to take a look at Billy for that. The fighter was no longer in the best shape of his life, with sweat visibly dripping down from his face. Deep huffing and panting, and his swings were getting slower as his arms felt heavier. Should I just wait for him to run out of gas? Gary wondered, yet at that point a buzzer-like sound could be heard. The next moment, everyone in the crowd took a single step forward. Suddenly the arena had gotten smaller. Gary didn't know the rules of the event, but he could tell that something was about to change, and it was unlikely to be anything good. With Gary looking around in a slight confusion, Billy saw it as a chance and went in for a grab. With no path of retreat, Gary went to do the only thing he could do. It should be something like this, right? Jumping off his feet toward the other guy, he shoved his right knee forward. Billy's head had been slightly tilted, so Gary's knee connected with the other's face. From the outside, it looked like an exact replica of what Inu had done before. The one in question nearly choked on his beer as he watched how his move had been copied after seeing it once. Alas, unlike Inu, Gary lacked the experience to follow up. He had clearly heard and felt Billy's nose break and thought this would be the end of it. The reality of the matter was that the other was able to shake the hit and, filled with rage, swung his right fist, for the first time managing to hit Gary. He wasn't sure if he was imagining it or not, but Gary could have sworn he heard a few cracking sounds as he was sent tumbling to the ground holding his side. The pain was intense, and with every breath he took it seemed to hurt even more. Does that blob have a sledgehammer hidden in those gloves? You have been inflicted with a grave injury. 17 HP. 83/100 HP. Your left rib cage has been broken. Energy points will be used to perform emergency healing. 10 energy. 88 out of 100 energy. As soon as this message appeared, Gary could feel something escape his body. His real energy sapped away, while at the same time his breathing got better. A few breaths later, and he was back to normal. It was as if he had never been hit in the first place. His broken bones had completely healed. However, while looking at his HP value, it said otherwise. Whoa, Gary thought, tapping his hurt side slightly. I healed and so quickly. Is this what it means to be a werewolf? Gary had visibly suffered a large blow, yet he somehow managed to stand up as if it had been nothing more than a light tap. The crowd was flabbergasted, but not as much as Billy himself, who knew best how much power should have been behind his hit. Billy's weight should be 2 times that of Green Fong, Inu calmly analyzed from the side. Unlike the rookie, he should also know how to fight properly, so it's impossible for him to have gone easy on his opponent. I'm also pretty sure there's a reason behind him wearing those gloves. Inu had been certain that Billy was the clear favorite in this match. Although Gary hadn't been too bad in terms of dodging and evading the other's attack, the rules of the arena were too much in favor of the veteran fighter. That one hit alone should have been the deciding factor. There's always a puncher's chance, as they say in boxing, Kai commented, looking on leisurely, as if everything was proceeding exactly according to his calculation. Nobody noticed that the cocktail glass that he had put aside was on the brink of fracturing. Gary was just as amazed at the extent of his resilience as everyone else, but since it was his body, he was simultaneously the first to come to the realization that it sadly changed very little. If anything, it just meant that he would have to suffer longer as a punching bag. As if on cue, Billy's experience helped him come to the same conclusion. Since Green Fong had not used this opportunity to fight back, it just meant that his opponent still lacked the means to defeat him. Why else would he have run around the whole time? As such, Billy went in for another punch towards Green Fong's head. Sensing the incoming threat, Gary braced himself and used his hands to block it. Yet in the next moment, he felt a sharp pain from his sides once more. Closing your eyes in the middle of a match. You really are a greenhorn, Billy shouted. You have been inflicted with a grave injury. Dash 20 HP. 63/100 HP. Your left rib cage has been broken. Energy points will be used to perform emergency healing. Dash 15 energy. 73/100 energy. Gary was unable to reply, too busy to grit through the pain. His opponent had fully intended to incapacitate him by striking at his supposedly injured side once more. Were it not for his newly attained healing factor, Gary was sure that the resulting injury would have put him out of commission for a few weeks in the best-case scenario. I need more power to be able to do anything to that blob, Gary thought to himself. I just have to be careful to not let my heart rate rise too much. He was not sure where exactly his limits were, but from the few times he had experienced it, Gary was aware that around 100 to 120 BPM, he seemed to grow more powerful. Nevertheless, somewhere between 130 to 150 BPM, he also started to transform and lose his sanity. The pressure of having to continuously dodge Billy's fists, but more prominently the second alarm sounding out, the crowd closing in on them, making the fighting area even smaller than it was before, worked in his favor. Unfortunately, although Gary's plan was working as intended, it was not doing so fast enough. Unless he got a power boost fast, he might end up losing this fight. His energy was seemingly unable to heal his HP, and he was not looking forward to find out what happened once it hit zero. He thought back to earlier today and what had allowed him to get his boost. It was one person, the new girl, Xian. He imagined that she was somewhere in this crowd, watching his fight, like she had done earlier today. 111 BPM, 118 BPM, 125 BPM. Your strength is increasing. Gary could feel the strength rising in him, and seeing Billy's fist, he didn't evade it. This time he widely swung back, and both fists collided midair. Some of those in the crowd squealed as they imagined the pain Gary must experience at that moment. They were not wrong. He was in a lot of pain, convinced that the knuckles in his fist were broken. Yet if they were, it didn't seem to be to a degree that his energy healing kicked in. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the first time that Green Fong has not been pushed back by Billy Buster, the announcer gleefully commented. Could this be the start of a comeback for our underdog? The crowd erupted in cheers as this fight finally started to resemble an actual brawl instead of a game of tag. Gary could care less about the crowd's entertainment. Internally, he was cursing due to the pain his hand was suffering from, pleading the system to do to his hand what it had done to his rib. Alas, it was to no avail. He had no choice but to continue to ignore it. Yet the good thing was that Billy was suffering even more than him. The metal plating the fighter had kept hidden had been smashed by Gary. Using such underhanded tricks was not against the rules of the arena, merely frowned upon since the crowd was expecting to see a fair fight. Using brass knuckles and the like was basically the equivalent of a fighter admitting that they didn't believe in their own skills. How is that possible? How did that broccoli head's punch suddenly get so much stronger? Billy was left wondering as he stood there looking at him, with his right hand throbbing. Could it be he just pretended to be weak to play with me earlier? No, that should be impossible. He is obviously a greenhorn. So how? It was a strange sight to behold, but Green Fong suddenly seemed like an entirely different person. His eyes were dead set on the person in front of him, and Billy could feel a slight shiver run through his body. Today, it was midnight, already going into the next day, and the sky was quite clear, shining down on all of them was part of the moonlight. Although Gary was unaware of all of this, he was just ready to go with his natural instincts. I need to calm down, Gary thought. The pain in his hand, the adrenaline of the fight, and the thoughts of Xan were all pushing his heart rate above what he had ever had before. 150 BPM, 155 BPM, 160 BPM. What is happening to me? Gary could tell that slowly he was losing his mind, and all his thoughts resolved on his desire to get rid of the person in front of him. He started running forward, ignoring the pain. Gary just hoped that if he could win the fight fast enough and get out of the arena, he could try and calm down, or at least get far enough away from anyone he could end up hurting. Billy, who had been too frightened to move up until now, finally snapped out of his earlier days, having convinced himself that Gary obviously must be far worse off than he was after smashing his fist into the brass knuckle. At that moment, he saw his opponent leap through the air with his hands behind his back. For the first time, Gary was the aggressor. He latched onto the surprised Billy with his legs between his armpits and his hands behind his neck. Billy managed to loosely grab Gary's hairs and pulled him forward. Although it was not enough to free his arms, it allowed him to punch Green Fong's head. After the first hit, almost possessed, Gary decided to dig his teeth right into Billy's right shoulder. His strong, powerful jaws were easily able to get through the thick skin. His victim screamed in pain. Wanting nothing more but to get his crazed opponent off, Billy let go. This prompted Gary to do the same, and he landed on the ground. As Billy stumbled slightly backward, worried about the throbbing wound. Unfortunately for him, Gary was not done yet. He leapt through the air once more, but this time delivering a drop kick aimed right at Billy's head. The blob's head flung to the side, and his whole body soon followed after it. The large body tumbled to the ground, as he had taken quite a hit and let out a small tremor that those at the front had felt. Unable to think straight, Gary was making sure to finish Billy off. He climbed on top of the poor guy, pinning his arms under his knees, and started to punch his head with his open palmed hands as if he was clawing at the person, one after another. "Gary, stop. Listen to me. The fight is over," Kai shouted out from the side, the smirk on his face gone, replaced with a serious face. He had seen many go through a fighter's high, but in Gary's case, it seemed that there was something more to it. "Oi, announcer, are your eyes only for decoration? Even an amateur could tell you that Billy Buster is out cold. Announce the result." Inu, just like everyone else, couldn't believe their eyes. How was it possible for such a scrawny guy to have such strength and such wildness? At the end, his fighting style, if one want to call it that, seemed more like that of a wild animal. One that had been backed into a corner and started to fight without any concern for self-preservation. Fortunately, the call had reached Gary, who had stopped, looking over to where Kai was. He suddenly felt exhausted and could only look over. His gaze seemed to ask Kai whether the fight was really over, and the next moment his eyes and body felt as if he had run a marathon. Ah yes, everyone, as you've heard, Billy Buster seems to have passed out. Please give a big round of applause for our newcomer, Jirarien and GG. The announcer declared, after it had become clear that the fight could not continue. Once he did, the system screen appeared in front of Gary to congratulate him. Quest reward, 50 EXP. Congratulations, you have reached now level 2. A new skill has been unlocked. A stat point has been granted. Gary was quite interested in the new skill, but quite honestly, he felt like he was going to collapse at any second. And just when his eyes were about to close, he could see that Kai had hurried over, with his hand held out. "You did well, Green Fong. Come on, I'll take you home," Kai insisted. Accepting his hand, Kai carried Gary out of the place with him over his shoulder. There were many that wanted to speak to them on the way out, but nobody dared to stop Kai as they made their way back. Before leaving, he turned towards Inu. "Remember our deal. I'll contact you about where and when to meet tomorrow," Kai said, as he continued to walk out, shortly stopping to collect his earnings. "But how will I contact you?" Inu asked, with a big smile on his face. "Check out your new uniform." Looking down in the bag that Kai had left next to him, Inu pulled out a uniform, and underneath the clothes there was a little burner phone. It was old and had physical buttons on it, but programmed on the phone was Kai's number. "Looks like I found my gang," Inu thought. A few minutes later, after Kai and Gary had left, Inu suddenly realized that the former had yet to give him his money. Unable to move, Billy had been taken off the stage and transported to the medical area. He had woken up around half an hour after he had been knocked out. The last thing he remembered was having been bitten by Green Fong. Although he wasn't sure what happened next, he just knew that there was no way in hell he would ever fight that crazy bastard. The medical staff present were mostly university students who were studying medicine. They were able to treat most things as long as they were not too serious. Billy's broken nose had not been a problem, and once he had woken up, they had informed him that he was mostly fine. The main thing they were concerned about was the bite mark on his shoulder. We tried our best to disinfect it, but if it still hurts or stings by tomorrow, it would be in your best interest to get it checked out at the hospital. The one in charge, an actual graduate who was already helping at his parents' doctor's office, advised him, before he went to check on his other patients. Standing up, Billy did indeed feel fine. Only the wound on his shoulder continued to throb. How the hell am I supposed to explain to them that I was bitten by a human, though?